Okay. The meeting is started. There's Gavin.
All right. Okay, we're all set up.
We're all great.
All right. I apologize, everybody, for running a few minutes behind. Technical difficulties with our, this is our third attempt at this. We're going to get better as we go forward, I'm sure. We've got a full dais. If I could go ahead and start with roll call. Wendy Hundley.
Wendy Hundley.
Amy.
Amy Patillo.
Sarah. Sorry, I didn't hear Sarah.
I think you're on mute.
Yeah.
Still on mute.
Sarah Hudson.
There we go. Welcome, Sarah. Buck.
Buck Shapiro.
Gavin.
Gavin Massengill.
And Mayor Dyson is here. We have Amber Lewis, as well as City Attorney Charlie Zeck on the line as well. We'll go ahead and, well, actually, just if you could bear with me just before we open public comment. Well, everybody knows Tom Farrell. Tom and Sandra Farrell, great members of our community, contributed a tremendous amount to our community over a number of years. We've all got a lot going on these days, and we all have a ton of challenges. But I just wanted to ask that everybody take a moment of time when they have it to think, pray, reflect, whatever it is you're tea on the Farrell family. Their son-in-law Caleb recently lost his valiant fight against cancer, and so I know that's going to be hard on them. And if you guys could just kind of bear them in mind as you go forward, I know their family would be appreciative. With that, if we could open up public comments, 10 after 3. Do we have any citizens that would like to comment on items that are not on the agenda? I'm going to request a couple of things. There's an option to raise your hand if you're joining us on your computer. It should be down in the right-hand corner, I believe, 3 dots. You'll click on it and you can click a little hand icon to raise your hand. If you're on a mobile app, it should be a very similar icon. I believe it'll be up in the right corner or left corner. Give everybody a couple minutes to find that, and I'll ask Amber, do we have anybody that's indicated they'd like to speak?
We do, Mayor. We have Julie Shaw.
Okay.
Julie, I have unmuted you, and you have the floor.
If I could, sorry, just before you get started, Julie, we generally request that citizen comments be held to 3 minutes. So thanks, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I'm Julie Shaw. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Yes. Okay. I called Carrie Kaler earlier in this week to ask. I've just been noticing a lot of traffic on Rollingwood Drive, which is in front of our house and in front of the fields over at Hadley. And I think that it seems to me that a lot of those cars are speeding. And I've got 3 teenagers. I send them out to walk the dog, and my daughter walks across the street to play softball. And then, neighborhood safety is a huge passion of mine. We lived in a neighborhood that was a very family-friendly walking neighborhood in Brooklyn. And there was a 12-year-old family friend that was hit by a car and killed. He had a soccer ball and rolled out into the street. He went to grab it in a car. He didn't make it back to the sidewalk in time. And so I have a lot of anxiety about the traffic and the street noise, and the speeds and the number of cars. And so I'd ask Carrie, what if there's already somebody that's looking at this on a regular basis, if it gets addressed on a regular basis. And it was her recollection that it doesn't get addressed on a regular basis. And she suggested that I bring it up with you guys. So I was wondering what I can do as a citizen to request maybe a study on how many cars are driving. I mean, I think that we've got delivery trucks. I think we've got ride shares. We've got a lot of construction equipment. Those are big, heavy cars, and if they're speeding, the time it takes them to stop, if there is a kid or an animal or somebody in the street, is a long time. And then there's just the noise from all that traffic. So, I know that there's this concept called Vision Zero, which New York City adopted about the time that our friend Sammy was killed. I know Austin is looking at Vision Zero, and that's just the concept that you can do things with your streets speed-wise and street design-wise to prevent accidents and deaths. So that goal is that there are 0 accidents and deaths from pedestrians being hit by motor vehicles. I wanted to propose it as something that the city consider making an initiative.
Great. Thank you, Julie. Just for some context, traffic on Rollingwood Drive and actually throughout the city has long been a concern. We've taken a number of proactive measures, including digital speed indicators. You may have seen those around town. The road striping is relatively new. The idea there was along the lines of what you mentioned, which is kind of a visual. It is an attempt to visually narrow the roadway. The psychological impact on drivers is purportedly, research suggests that it encourages them to slow down. I would say that has been a priority. Safety in our community is always going to be a top priority for us. So I know we've got Chief Brady joining us in this meeting. I have no doubt that he's going to hear this and suggest to his officers that certainly they pick up a little more visual presence and make sure that proper speeds are being enforced. We have a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit through the park area. There are various limitations on how much a city can reduce the speed. 25 is the lowest threshold that we can go, and even dropping it below 30 miles an hour requires certain conditions, which again our park, the area and roads around our park justified that drop in speed to 25 miles an hour. So, Julie, I guarantee you, we're looking at it. Can we do a better job? Potentially, and we're always up for it. And I have no doubt that, as I say, the chief here in this is going to make sure that the officers are taking a closer look.
Okay, that'd be great. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks for coming and speaking, Julie.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
You too. Do we have anybody else for public comment?
I do not see any other hands raised, Mayor.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. We'll just give a couple seconds longer. Anybody out there consider this kind of your last call? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and close public comments then. If there's nothing, Amber? Nothing? Okay, we'll close our public comments at 3:16, and we will move on to the consent agenda. The only thing on the consent agenda are draft minutes from our last meeting. Do we have a motion, council?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion from Sarah and a second from Wendy. If I could get, we'll just call the names for vote. Wendy,
Aye.
Amy,
Aye.
Sarah,
Aye.
Buck,
Aye.
Gavin. Did I miss it, Gavin? Did you freeze up over there?
No, he's just on mute.
Got it.
He's not on mute.
Not on mute.
Hey,
No.
Gavin, I can see you. You want to nod? Charlie, is that acceptable?
Oh, he sounds really.
The gray hair on his beard is distorting the cell phone signal.
I hear you.
Okay, we can hear you now.
All right.
See, it worked.
All right. There we go. Okay. So we have a unanimous approval of the consent agenda. We'll move on to item 3, discussion and possible action on a second read of a resolution establishing the COVID-19 Emergency Relief Grant Program. Just for context, Council, this was the project proposal put forward by RCDC. We had our first read at our previous meeting, and to date, we have had some interest. I believe we've received, last count, we had 1 full application, and I believe 2 or 3 other applications that have partial applications that have come in. Here's your context.
Do we need to take any action on that, or is it just a reading again? I can't remember.
We do need to take action. Amber, you want to give them, do you have the background on why?
I think Charlie prefers that you all take action on the reading of the resolution.
Yes, that's accurate.
Okay.
I move to pass a resolution of the City Council approving a project of the Rollingwood Community Development Corporation as authorized by Section 505.158 of the Texas Local Government Code, authorizing certain financial assistance to be used for businesses located within the city of Rollingwood, Texas, and providing for an effective date.
Thanks. And just for the record's sake, that's resolution number 2020-04-15-06. Is that right? Yes. Okay. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion from Wendy and a second from Amy. Discussion, Council? Amber, any hands up? Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yep.
So I know that there was going to be some discussion about parameters. And I saw that the application went out and it just had a general space for people to fill in what they would do with the money. So are we authorizing RCDC then to look at applications and look at that description and have discretion to decide whether to approve or not approve based on what's in the description?
Yes.
Yes, and that's my understanding that council was comfortable there. And then last, well, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, for an added layer of oversight, we drafted Gavin for an extra set of eyes and thoughts on that.
Great. And then I didn't see it. Maybe I missed it because I'm reviewing a lot of things right now and not seeing all the details with the load I have. But is there a requirement for a proof of how the funds are actually used?
There is, Charlie, do you want to explain
No, feel free, Amber, unless you want me to.
Yes,
Moving it.
please.
It's a performance agreement that everybody's required to sign.
Right.
And then gives us the right to, I don't have it memorized or do I have it in front of me, but there's a performance agreement that obligates them to perform in a certain way, and if they don't, we have a right to recoup our grant funds. Although, quite honestly, the amount of money of grant funds we're talking about, it costs more to recoup them than it would go after them. But we do have that authority.
Does that help answer your question, Amy?
That answered
So-
my question. Go ahead. My only other thought on it was that I am hopeful that we see some businesses that are looking at using grant money to install, whether it's to, I know that rent is a huge thing right now for a lot of businesses, but also making sure that their employees have personal protective equipment or other ways to make their businesses safer. So I know that the RCDC will have the discretion of deciding those things, but I'm hoping to see personally some improvements in those areas.
Maybe it helps if I provide a couple of details that were actually discussed at the RCDC meeting when we chose to adopt this as a project. The idea was to help them potentially expand business as well, to kind of accommodate the fact that maybe moving to online, a greater online presence, or somehow allowing for curbside pickup. Basically, whatever business development they may need to kind of expand their business to accommodate the changing circumstances. And certainly, part of that would be ensuring now that the governor has suggested that certain businesses should open back up to the public. Certainly a large part of that, growing their business and maintaining their business, would be ensuring a level of safety for both employees and patrons and customers. I guess that's my long-winded way of saying.
That's my only comment. Thank you.
I have no doubt that RCDC will be weighing that in with regards to the question on need.
Right, because I think that with the businesses that can't apply, I'm looking at the ones that are left that can apply, and some of them still aren't allowed to open right now, like our gyms, because we have several of those. And so when they are able to reopen, I imagine that the governor's order is going to include things that they have to modify that may be the cost to them to reopen. So that'd be great if we can help support that.
Yep. That's certainly the idea, and yeah. Again, I think you're right to suggest that there's a level of discretion that we're entrusting to the RCDC, and then again having Gavin with an extra set of eyes to hopefully carry over the voice and will of the city council to make sure that it's implemented properly. Do we have any other comments or questions or discussion, council?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
No. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna log off and come back on. I just updated this app. I'm gonna see if it works better. So I'll be back.
Well, in that case, we'll hold open.
No, keep going. You're fine. I don't have any questions. I'm good on this.
No. Okay. Well, then we have a motion and a second, and if there's no further discussion, Amber, anybody raise their hands from the public on that?
No, sir.
Right on. Well, then I'll go ahead and call for the vote. Wendy?
Aye.
Amy?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Buck.
Aye.
We want to wait for Gavin to get back on.
Still on.
Oh, he is. Can we hear him?
Hold on. He's on and he's unmuted.
Okay.
Okay, hold on. He just checked out. Okay. Okay, Gavin, you're unmuted by me.
Okay, I'm back.
You're on the clock, man. You drafting an aye or a nay?
Aye.
All right, council. The second reading of the resolution, adopted, passed unanimously. Thank you very much, council. We'll move on to item 4, discussion on the quarterly budget review for the second quarter. And I'm going to open the floor up to Abel to walk us through.
This is the budget review for the second quarter of the current fiscal year.
Can you hear him okay?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Okay. Some of the items of note, in the general fund, current property taxes, we've collected 97% of our estimated revenue. Our city sales tax, we've collected 63% of our estimated revenue, so we're above projections. On some of the other funds, the water fund, our revenue is at 64% of our estimated revenue, so we're doing fairly well there. But in wastewater, the wastewater fund, we're at 49%, and so we're lagging a little bit behind our projected estimated revenue there. The only comment I have regarding city sales taxes, we don't know what impact the current economy is going to have on our future collections. We won't know probably until the May collections come in, because that will reflect March, April activities. So we'll see then what impact that's going to have on the city as far as sales tax collections go. Those are the only comments I have. Any questions?
I mean, I know when Gavin was spearheading the budget with Abel and Amber, the decision was made, the correct decision was made to go pretty conservative. Is that a correct recollection on the projections? Yeah. Wise move. Let's we'll just stick with that. Good work, Gavin. Abel, thank you. Amber, thank you very much. Council, do you have any questions for Abel? No. Abel, thanks again. It'll be interesting to see the numbers, as you mentioned, in May.
Yes, sir.
With no other discussion, we'll move on to item number 5, discussion and possible action on an ordinance amending section 103-232F, stormwater detention of the city's code of ordinances. Council, we have a draft from Charlie, and then we received alternate language proposed by Councilmember Hudson. Tell you what, this is what we lovingly refer to as the moat situation, right? I'm going to let, Sarah, you want to open us up on kind of your thinking with the revised language?
Okay. So we had talked about this a long time ago after the ordinance was adopted, and P&Z actually had a work group that was supposed to be coming up with alternate language for this, and I don't know whatever happened. Buck maybe can tell us what happened with that, but I don't think that they ever came up with any suggestions. But one of the things that was discussed at that time was the items that I included in there, that clearly we should not have anything built in the right-of-way or in the easements, because then that precludes or complicates the use of those areas for the purpose that they have been already established for, right? If you build something in the right-of-way, then you can't use it if you need to do something in the road, or if the utility company will just come in and start doing what they need to do in the easement, and they don't even have to clear it with you. And so if we are requiring people to put in permanent controls to detain their flow to protect downstream neighbors, we should not put those things in a place where they can be damaged or removed, because then they lose the protection that they're supposed to be providing. And we have had some detention facilities installed in front yards that are closer to the street than they should be, because they're in the right of way, and that are also essentially concrete walls that violate our front yard fence ordinance, which is why I had added the portion about the front yard fences and the retaining walls, because we have restrictions on those things that are not being complied with for the detention facilities.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Sarah. And then that's what your revised language is obviously set to consider.
Yes. Right.
Is Jay on this phone call?
It's a great question. Do we have Jake Campbell on here, Amber?
Jay is not on here. No.
Do we have anybody from L&B on here? Marcus?
No. I can text him and see if he's available. Carrie's here.
Hey, Carrie. How there? Hey. There you are. I can see you
Hey,
almost.
Gary, do you know of any drainage facilities that have been constructed in the road right away since you've been in charge? I don't think Jay has approved any.
Off the top of my head, no, but I would want to go back and look at the I think there's been 2 variances approved and another one in the queue for this, and see and double check that before I gave you a firm answer. There has been one that was approved in the rear yard utility easement, but not in the front yard right of way, as far as I can remember. And then the one that was approved in the rear yard utility easement, there weren't any lines currently, like a rear yard water line that was going to be impacted by that.
All right, thank you.
Charlie, do you mind if I put you on the spot real quick? And,
Yeah, go ahead.
I know you mind, but I'm going to do it anyway. What is, do you have maybe just kind of generally what the impact is if somebody constructed an item that the city required as part of their drainage facility, and they built that in an easement? It's, some work has to happen in the easement. It injures that that facility that the city required. How does that scenario work out from a legal perspective? The city has the right to go back and require the property owner to reinstall to spec the facility?
It's going to depend on the easement document whether it's on a plat or whether it's an easement document that's been created at an arm's length transaction and then filed somewhere, we'd have to look at those easement documents. Some cities will authorize and allow encroachments into their easements depending upon the easement, right? I mean, an aerial easement is completely different than an easement that's got stormwater pipes underground.
Sure.
But they'll authorize it oftentimes, but subject to a easement encroachment license, kind of like what we did with the Tetons.
Right.
We authorized them to approach, but then, well, actually, it would be different than that because there was some other consideration. But it would be an easement encroachment license that basically says that you're allowed to encroach in our easement, but we can require you to remove it at any time at your cost. We can go in and do whatever we're obligated, we are authorized to do within our easement. We're not responsible for any damages, things like that.
Okay.
But oftentimes those easement documents on the plats, if it's a platted easement or if it's a filed easement document, already provide for this thing. So that's why I say it depends.
Okay. So just to walk me through a scenario, we allow people to put, fences. Most utility easements, or many utility easements through our city, run through people's backyards, and we actually had water line easements through people's backyards up until not too many years ago. We started getting away from that. Some of those easements still exist, even though the pipe maybe doesn't. So that'll be a discussion for a different day. But we allow those folks to put up landscaping in their backyards and fences around their perimeter. Is this different?
No, it's not different. It's the same thought process. It's just a different type of encroachment.
Got it.
I would argue that it is different though.
Okay.
Because if somebody puts up a fence or landscaping on their property
Mhm.
in the easement and then it gets damaged or whatever, then it only is affecting their property. But if we have somebody that has to put up a detention facility, that is designed to protect the downstream properties. And if they put that up in an easement and then it is damaged or taken out because the easement is being used, then the protection for the downstream property owners is not present anymore.
And that's those are valid points. And I want to make clear that what I was referring to is it any different from a legal perspective? And from a legal perspective, there is no difference. There could be policy differences, but legally there's no difference.
Are there remedies for downstream folks if that were the case?
There are, of course, there are, and I'm trying to think would any of them be against the city because the city took an intentional act by authorizing the drainage facility within the easement, and it caused more downstream flooding than it would otherwise. But my understanding of this whole process was that it's not that you're authorizing a drainage facility to be bigger and to allow more water downstream. You're just simply authorizing a variance to where you allow that to be otherwise placed. So yes, a downstream owner would have remedies against an upstream property owner if the upstream property owner and the design and construction of that drainage facility resulted in an increase of water onto their property. But that would be the same regardless of whether or not it was in our easement or not in our easement.
My concern is if it's not there anymore, right? If something is done to it to take it out of service because it's in an easement, and then we have a big rainstorm, then that is no longer limiting the flow off the property to the downstream neighbors. And telling somebody that they have some legal recourse if that happens is not much consolation if their house gets flooded as a result.
Sure. That's a legitimate concern, but I don't think legally, if the city came to me and said, wow, we now need use of this easement, and we're going to have to require those people to move their drainage facility. We would require them to do so in a way that still complied with our requirements under the statute, under our local codes. So I certainly wouldn't recommend that we say, yeah, take out your drainage facility, it's no longer needed. It would be, you need to place your drainage facility or reconstruct your drainage facility in a different manner so that it's outside of our easement, because now we need that easement. But you still would need to reconstruct it in a way that is compliant with our rules and regulations.
Yeah, but my concern is that the utility companies don't come and ask you to move something ahead of time. They come in and start digging, and they don't even ring the doorbell and let you know they're getting ready to do it.
So I think it becomes a kind of a policy question on our side, right? Do we want to allow citizens to take on the potential future cost risk of having to move their facilities and rebuild their facilities if they elect to have their facilities built in an easement where somebody else has some superior right? Right. I mean, it's.
Now, see, the way I look at it, Mike, it's not the risk of the homeowner that has the detention facility. It's our responsibility to protect the property rights of the downstream property owners.
Yeah,
And so
I
saying,
think,
oh yeah, they'll
yeah,
have to rebuild it is not my concern. My concern is that we need to require them to put it in a place that will stay permanent and not be damaged or taken out because it's in an easement that has been dedicated for other purposes, because we are supposed to be protecting all of our residents.
right. But again, we're believe it or not, I think we're making a very similar point. The question, I think, is just, again, policy. Are we going to manage that as the city, that responsibility, or do we expect the individual property owners to manage that responsibility for themselves? So that's
the whole reason we came up with this drainage
responsibility. What I'm referring to is the responsibility not to damage the downstream neighbors. Right. That's the responsibility that I'm referring to, not necessarily the damaged folks. The responsibility for them to pick the fight back with their neighbors. So, just for the sake of
I have a question, and I don't know how to raise my hand on this app. But I'll wait to be called on. I'm just letting you know.
Right on. Sorry, Gavin, you slide just off my screen. So please, yeah, the floor is yours, bud.
Okay. My first question is to Charlie and Amber, and it's just procedural. So, and maybe I missed a memo here, but this is recodified. This used not to be in something called 103-232. And I assume that got changed when we switched over to Muni Code. But I bring that up. This used to be in our chapter related to zoning, which would require it to go through P&Z. I'm fine with it not, if that's where we are today, but I just want to make sure that we're thinking through that. Does this not require?
It's a great question. This would have to go through P&Z if it was a structure that we didn't otherwise authorize in this, like a house, like if you wanted to put a house in the setback. My understanding is that these types of structures are not the types that structures like this are generally authorized within the setback. It's not subject to the setback requirements. We just have decided that in order to do that, you have to come get permission. And you don't need to get that permission through the ZBOA because it wouldn't be a variance.
Okay.
I don't know if that made sense, but that's the answer to the question.
It does. It does. And then my second question is somewhat legal, and it plays off of Sarah's concern. And let's say a utility company does come into their easement and and damages or alters an existing stormwater detention facility, that would not, that homeowner would still be required to comply with section 103-232 after that damage occurred, would they not? Since their approval originally complied with 103. I mean, because 103A talks about a permanent stormwater detention designed for post-construction, yada, yada, yada. It gives, it gives the basic parameters that then you have to go over to the DCM to get the design criteria for. But if they're approved, if a project is approved under 103-232 and it later gets damaged for whatever reason or by whoever, wouldn't that homeowner still be required to comply with 103-232?
I can answer that question. They would, and I've pulled it up. I didn't have it pulled up, and I was because I knew all we were doing was deleting a requirement. For some reason, everyone was talking about variances, and so easements, and so I didn't have any issue with that. But what this does, so the current ordinance requires that that a detention facility be located at minimum 10 feet setback from the property line. So the current rule is you can't put a detention facility within 10 foot of the property. So that's not really a setback. Again, not a zoning issue. It is a requirement that we have in our construction requirements. What you would be doing is waiving that requirement to allow them to place it within 10 foot of the within a 10-foot setback of the property line. It could go right up to the property line if they wanted to do it. They would, however, have to fully comply with any and all other obligations that are on the ground. So if there's a plat that's got an easement on it for any type of easement, aerial easement, utility easement, drainage easement, whatever it happened to be, they would still have to comply with those easement requirements. So even though you're deleting this from your section that requires them to come in and get permission because it's 5 foot from the property line instead of 11 feet from the property line, they would still have to comply with any easement requirements that are on the plat or any easements that are filed at the courthouse. So for example, if they want to place it within 10 foot of the property line, but there's a drainage easement on, where they want to put it, they couldn't put it there unless they complied with the easement requirements. So this is not a carte blanche authority to place the drainage facility anywhere they want. It just says, hey, you can put it within 10 foot of the property line now if you want. They do still have to comply with any and all other regulatory requirements that are in place, including if there's an easement there, they would still have to comply with that. There may be an easement that says, yeah, the city says you can put it within 10 feet of the setback, but you can't put it here because there's a drainage easement and you can't put this type of, or there's a stormwater pipe under here, so you can't put it there. So this isn't carte blanche, put it wherever you want. You would still have to comply with any and all other regulatory restrictions that are in place. I hope that kind of clears up some of the questions and issues.
Well, would that apply also to the front yard fence requirements as well? Under that
I don't know what
rationale?
our front yard fence requirements are, so I can't answer that directly, but to the extent that we have a similar requirement for front yard fence setbacks, that would be correct.
It's not just the front yard fences, it's not just setbacks, there's also
Heights and all that.
visibility and height issues.
Right.
In materials.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make clear my point, which is this regulation requires you to put a detention facility at least 10 foot from any property line. If you strike this, it allows them to put it right up to the property line if they want, except they would still have to comply with any other regulatory or restrictions that are on the ground. The example being, if there's an easement where they want to put it, they would still have to comply with the easement requirements. And if the easement requirement does not allow that type of structure to be put in that easement, then they can't put it there, no matter if you strike this requirement.
So I don't think any easement that we have, I mean, any of the original easements that we have for properties in Rollingwood wouldn't have any reference to a detention facility in them. Because
no, but it wouldn't have specific reference to a detention facility, but it would have reference to structures or other encroachments. The typical easement document that's drafted and put in place specifies very clearly what type of, what encroachments, if any, are authorized within the easement, what the obligations are of the owner who puts the encroachment in the easement, who's responsible for maintaining those things. And you see that both in a filed easement, an easement that is drafted, negotiated, and filed at the courthouse, and you'll see them also on platted easements, where the plat actually states, this area has been dedicated as a public utility easement, no encroachments are authorized, et cetera, et cetera.
But in fairness to Sarah, for an overhead easement, there wouldn't be any reference to any sort of surface improvement because they don't care what you do at
because
surface.
They don't care what surface encroachments go in.
But to Sarah's point, that wouldn't preclude Austin Energy from coming in and damaging a surface improvement at ground level, even though it's a overhead easement. But that gets back to my point. If that did happen, that homeowner would still be required to comply with 103-232 as they were originally approved for the detention facility.
That is correct. They would still be required to comply with any and all detention requirements that you have in place, even if a subsequent regulatory entity came in and damaged it. They would have to repair it back to its original requirements.
And so my question then would be, what enforcement mechanism does the city have to come back on a homeowner if we had a downstream homeowner that says, hey, my upstream neighbor, Austin Energy came in and messed up their detention facility. Now I'm getting more flow than was intended. You guys have to make them comply with what you approved to begin with. What enforcement mechanism does the city have to ensure compliance with 103-232 in that situation?
I'm not intimately familiar with 103-232 or the requirements of your stormwater detention, but if they are typical of other stormwater detention regulatory requirements by other cities, there is a responsibility to continually maintain and operate the drainage and detention facility consistent with its intended original design, which would give us some enforcement authority, or the typical enforcement authority that you would have in any ordinance, which is civil penalties, municipal court citations, things of that nature.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, I have a question.
Yeah, please go.
So not to cut off any other comments or questions for Charlie, but I just wanted to give my comment, which is that this was on the agenda for us to address the issue of the constant moat appeal, which has continually been presented before the council and has had the same result. So I appreciate Councilmember Hudson's effort at alternative language, but we got it 2 hours before the meeting, and neither our attorney nor any of us would have had the opportunity to be able to actually review every possible scenario. So I think that a lot of the questions that have been raised are really positive, and I also think I think that the intention of this agenda item, as I understood it, was for us to address the moat appeal, and now we suddenly have what could potentially be even more problematic than the moat appeal. It would be like moat appeal part 2 if we were to adopt language that has been proposed in the alternative. And I think that if we were to adopt any language like this, I would prefer for us to have a memo from our attorney beforehand so that our residents would know what we are actually doing with that. And Carrie would also have clarity ahead of time for all the questions that are going to come into her on an issue like this. So I think I'm just hearing so many different issues being raised. We're talking about easements, we're talking about fences and retaining walls, and have the question of, have we already allowed detention facilities in these areas, and what's the liability if they get removed? My comment is just that I appreciate the effort, but I feel like we put this on the agenda to address one question, and now I'm concerned that we've raised a whole new set of questions that really isn't within the scope of what I thought this was addressing.
So then maybe we just table this and take it up at the next meeting where we've had time for more review and get some input from the city attorney.
I guess my question is, if we were to remove F, which is the moat issue, is F the only thing that has been precluding people from placing things in easements? I mean, that issue I have never ever heard that issue raised in all of the moat appeals that we've had.
Mayor,
You've never heard what issue raised?
I've never heard any of the issues that have now been raised in the proposed language for F. I've never heard those raised from any of our building officials or engineer or any homeowners as part of that appeal. It's just been about the reality of creating a moat in a yard, because that would have adverse effects because of placing something 10 feet away from the setback, which means that you're placing it 10 feet away from a fence line and creating this moat type of feature in people's yards.
Can I
know Jay,
ask a question?
I know Jay's joined us as well. So I don't know if I know we had a question earlier that was potentially directed at Jay and L&V. Anyway, sorry, Wendy, go ahead.
I have a comment first, and then I have some questions. Actually, I'll ask questions first, and then I'll say my comment. Right now, as I understand it, the easements that we have are the water lines, gas lines, electric, guy wires, like electric poles, and some drainage easements. My question on that is, do we have anything in our building code or in our ordinance now that requires contractors to call 811 before they excavate or dig anywhere on their property?
Carrie, you want to take that?
I missed the first part of the question. I heard you say, is there something requiring them to call 811? What was the first part of your question?
Do we have anything in our building documents or in our city code where we require for contractors to call 811 before they excavate or dig within an easement on their property?
There's nothing in the code, but you do advise them when they're getting their permits.
It's stated on the signed permit that they're required to contact 811 ahead of time. But it's not part of the code.
If we were to require that all utilities be located before excavation or digging in a setback, then perhaps that would take away the confusion of whether or not there is an easement that's going to be disturbed as part of a drainage solution for a property. I think that would be something that I would want to look into a little bit. If we do come around to updating our policy on this in the future. My other comment is I'm okay today with striking F and removing the moat issue from our meetings every month. And if we want to come back at a future meeting and consider some language on whether or not we want to require people to locate utilities or maybe look at some of the language that Sarah has and adding it in on a different agenda item, I would be open to discussing that more in the future. But I think right now there's some fatigue on the dais when when it comes to moats and moat discussions, and I think it's caused a lot of fatigue within our community. It costs a lot of time and money, and basically comes down to the drainage facilities are functioning properly and the way that they're supposed to function, and they are just not located in the right area, and the building official does not feel comfortable allowing that drainage facility there because of this rule in our ordinance. And so he would otherwise approve it, but yet then it has to come to the city council for us to say, sir, would you like to have a moat in your yard? And they have to say, no, I would not like to have a moat. And then we have to approve the setback requirement being removed. So I'm ready to take that off and then to look at language to improve it later.
I have one more question I'm sorry. I'm raising my hand.
Yeah, go ahead, Gavin.
Is Wendy done?
I'm done.
Okay. This question is for Jay, mainly because I feel bad that he had to get on here if we don't ask him a question. Jay, are you ready?
Yeah, you are unmuted. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Jay?
He says he's muted, but he's not.
I've been there, man.
He says he doesn't have permission. Here, let me mute
He has my permission.
you again. Okay, try. Okay, Jay, maybe I'll bump you as a panelist. Hold on. Maybe that'll.
Hello?
There
Hey,
you are.
Jay.
Awesome. All right. So I walked in the door about 15 minutes ago. I think you all are in the middle of this conversation, but I've been picking up and I understand that we're discussing the moat or the setback issue for the detention ponds, correct?
That's correct.
That's correct.
And I'll try
All
to lay out my question so that you can pick up
Yes, sir.
anything that you missed. So if
Okay.
you were to have a stormwater detention plan laid on your desk and it happened to be over a drainage easement, I would assume, first of all, that drainage easement would be the city's drainage easement, most likely, correct?
Yeah, that's very rare, but we only have a handful of drainage easements. But yeah, I believe that would be the case.
And so if you were looking at that and it overlaid a city drainage easement, you would you would take into account the possible flows from that easement in your analysis of the detention facility, would you not?
Yes, the engineer that would be looking at the design or signing the plans
Yeah.
would. Not me myself, but yes, an engineer would.
So it would most likely be, it wouldn't be all that feasible from an engineering standpoint to put a drainage facility, a stormwater detention facility in a drainage easement, because you would by definition have to assume those other possible inflows from the easement, correct?
I think that's correct.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, council, do we have, it's a lot of discussion. Are we inclined to take action one way or another? I do think that a lot of good points have been raised here. And then I think the biggest question ends up being, do we unintentionally open up anything by adopting this? Well, in either form, as presented by our legal counsel or as presented by council member Hudson. Are we inclined to take action, council?
I'd like to make a motion. I move to amend the city's Code of Ordinances, Part 2, Chapter 103, Article 6, Stormwater Drainage Division 2, Drainage Requirements, Section 103-232, Stormwater Detention, by removing subsection F, the requirement for drainage facilities to be located at minimum 10 foot from all property lines.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. We've had a lot of discussion, but we're obviously open to more discussion now. Again, just if I could be bold enough, council, just to say, I like the idea of taking action on removing this mode situation that we, Wendy, you're right, we struggle with frequently. I do think Sarah has made some pretty good points as well with regard to, let's make sure that if we remove this, it's not opening up the floodgates, as I think Charlie said earlier, that that was his terminology, and suggested that it wouldn't be. Let's just make sure that everyone's comfortable. I just recommend that everyone's comfortable with that analysis. I have any vote there.
Yeah, I'm fine voting for the motion as it stands. I'll say I don't have a great deal of problem with Sarah's language. The only thing she and I would likely argue somewhat over the utility easement piece of it. But really, other than the utility easement, I don't have the second sentence of Sarah's language is basically a restatement of statute that they would already need to be in compliance with, and this would just be making it clear that they would need to be in compliance with 107.34 and 107.33. As far as I don't have a problem with saying it can't be in the road right of way. I don't have a problem with saying it can't be in the drainage easement, because I don't think that typically it would happen anyway from an engineering standpoint, and I think it makes sense to not overlay a detention facility on top of a drainage easement just because of the added inflows into the easement. So really the only sticking point that I would even argue about on any sort of future action would be over the utility easement, because I feel like the city has enforcement ability on the upstream resident to ensure that they put anything back that gets damaged. And that's so anyway, that's a very long rambling statement to say I'm generally okay with a small exception from what Sarah has, but I'm also fine with adopting what's in front of us right now.
Okay. Well, Other discussion, council?
Maybe we could take it in two parts and take up the motion that's before us right now, and then there could be a second motion, Gavin, to propose language to replace it. That's
if y'all, I was just saying where I was on it. I'm happy to vote for it, however it is. I'm just letting everybody know where I am. So we'll do it however you all want to do it.
I'm good with voting on this now and then taking some time to think through all of the things that we talked about. And then if we feel like it is something that the city needs to have in order to make sure that it's clear for builders, or that the city has protected our interests, then I'm fine with adding language in there that needs to be added in. And I would love the legal memo on it. If we find that we need to do that, I'm great with it.
We have another meeting in 2 weeks, is that right? Or is it 3 weeks from now?
3 weeks.
Not soon enough. Miss you guys.
It'll be a completely different world in 3 weeks. Just wait and see. I have no idea what it's going to be. Well, council.
Can I ask one more? Would 3 weeks be enough time with everything that the staff has on its plate right now to review the proposed language and get with Charlie, and also look at any existing permits to make sure that we don't create like non-conforming drainage structures, if that's even a thing?
That's a great question.
I have
Go ahead, Gary.
And they're not so much concerns with putting, engineered approved drainage structures in the setback. I have no opinion on that one way or another. My concern is that if we allow the restriction to fall to the plat, that there may be some plats that were approved that are hanging out in the ether that would be perhaps unintentionally grandfathered, and someone could come forward with plans and us go back and realize, well, we have an approved plat here, but we don't have things noted on the plat the way we would like them to be. So there is a safety net in taking these case by case, just to make double certain that, if there was an older plat or a plat that was improperly filed or approved, we're not then required to approve drainage that we might not have approved otherwise. And then as far as timeline goes, I feel like I could probably be prepared 3 weeks from now. But that's my main concern with having it fall to the plat documents, just that we have some, a lot of old plats haven't been revisited in a while.
So Carrie, would Gavin's proposal of adding F but without the utility language, would that help you not have potentially a stack of plats that become questionable, or a stack of permits?
I think that's a question for Charlie.
Unfortunately, I have not seen, because it hasn't been provided to me, a copy of whatever it was that the council member has sent. I have no idea what it says.
Here, Charlie, I'll try to email that to you, but it's in the packet.
Is it? I looked. Is it at the back of the packet?
Amber,
It's
I
the
don't actually-
alternative amendment.
Oh,
Was it?
okay. I was looking at the 22nd part. Okay.
Charlie, I'm with you. I couldn't find it there. I found it in an email.
Okay.
It's under item number 5. There's the ordinance stormwater detention setbacks, and then there's the ordinance stormwater detention setbacks alternative amendment. It's the
Yeah.
second one.
Or when I refresh, there it is. I was early getting into my agenda. There you go. At least you know I was doing some work.
Well, maybe that was my problem because I don't have it in I must not have.
I just sent it to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, you must have sent it over to Mexico first. There it is. All right. All right, what's the alternative here? So, and the new F. No part of a detention facility shall be located within a road right-of-way, utility easement, or drainage easement. A detention facility installed in a front yard must comply with the city's front yard fence requirements. I mean, legally, this all looks fine to me. I'm not familiar with 107-34 or 107-33, so I don't know what kind of impact that would have. But on the face of it, I mean, these are policy decisions.
You should read them. You're going to love them.
I will. I don't know if it's a good use of time for me to read it now, but I'm happy to.
Council, I'll tell you what. For the sake of time, I would request or suggest that we take some level of action on the motion currently in front of us, and then it seems like there's certainly enough to consider and have legal counsel weigh in on for us to bring back at the very least, regardless as to whether action is taken affirmatively or not on this motion, to bring this issue back in May. Are we good there? Yeah. Okay. Well, we have a motion on the table. Assuming it's not being withdrawn, just shake your head. There you go. Figured correctly. All right. In that case, I'll go ahead and call the vote on it. I'm not going to be too badly for cutting off the conversation. Wendy?
Aye.
Amy?
Aye.
Sarah?
No.
Buck?
Aye.
Gavin?
Aye.
Okay. The motion carries then 4-1. And guys, let's not let the ball drop on bringing this back in May. As I mentioned before, those are some really good points to be made, and certainly worth our time to take a closer look, okay? All right, council. We're going to move on to item 6, discussion and possible action on a list of locations for the placement of test electronic water meters. Amber, we talked about this last week. Specifically, I believe the conversation turned to Jay and Carrie about whether or not the list that we had, or the volunteers that we had, adequately represented gave us a good idea, a full spread of our water system throughout the city. We discussed it a couple weeks ago, I suppose. Now it's back in front of us, presumably after you guys have taken a closer look and made sure that it's a little more representative of our entire system, or ensure that it's more representative of our entire system. Is that a good understanding?
Correct. We laid on the 2 pressure planes. We laid out the addresses who are willing to participate. We reached out to a few. We were hoping we could get somebody on Timberline Ridge, but they refused. At the end of the day, they have to volunteer to participate. Obviously, the other pressure plane's quite a bit smaller than the blue one, so we have more representation in the blue pressure plane than we do in the red one. But Jay felt confident that we one of the addresses is the lowest point in the city, and so he felt that was good. So we just need one more volunteer. I wasn't sure if Amy, if you wanted to volunteer or not, but otherwise we can move forward.
I'm fine volunteering.
That'd be great.
Most likely, there will need to be an extra booster to get the actual Wi-Fi signal because
Okay.
it's really problematic down in the cul-de-sac.
No, I
See
think-
what you're- yeah.
I was going to say, I think,
Yeah, me too. Me too. I need that also.
All right. Well played. Do we have
It's just a fact.
fair. Amber, Jay, Gary, do we feel like we have enough representation in pressure zone 2? It's a smaller zone, but does it make any level of difference?
I mean, I wish we had someone on Timberline Ridge, but we couldn't get anybody to volunteer.
I get you. Is that the only? I mean, is Timberline Ridge just that? There's something specific about that where maybe dropping something on Farley Trail or Vale didn't accomplish.
2 people who had significant water problems on Pickwick right down there.
Jay, do you want to weigh
I
in?
mean,
Okay, yeah, I think that would be fine. I know we've had some historical issues supposedly on Timberline Ridge. That's why I emphasized choosing an address there. But if there's another known location for problems, I see no issue with choosing one on like Pickwick, for example. That would be fine. I just don't have history of the meter or the billing complaints, so I wasn't aware of where those are located. So,
Well, for my part, I see 300 Inwood. I will tell you that most of my concerns with water consumption, I believe we've properly narrowed down to basically just catastrophically irrigation. So we may not, my house may not actually be most effective for a read there anyway. So if it makes more sense to relocate that to an address on Pickwick, I'm certainly happy to do that. As I say, I think the biggest thing we want to get here is accurate information across as wide a spread of our system as we can, right? I mean, that's what we're trying to achieve.
yes.
We are, but we also need active engagement. So whoever, we need them to volunteer the information, actively check on the information, and be willing to share it. And so that's really what we're ending up. That's really what's determining who is on this list.
Right. Because there's at least 6 suckers on my screen right now that volunteer all kinds of time. So we might as well give our water information as well. Okay, that's a fair assessment. Well, I'll tell you what. So we have one left. One of the 15 left. Amy, you're going to get a free Wi-Fi booster out of the gig, and that's a pretty good representation of our systems and the 2 pressure planes, and we're confident that the people that we're engaging for this are going to also be engaged in providing the information. Is that?
Yes.
Great. Well, I'll tell you what, with that contact, council, I'm going to ask you guys if you have, do we need to take action to approve this, Amber? This has been previously approved. I think this has been approved. We were kind of assessing where the locations needed to be. Is that right? Do we want to take action here?
That would be great.
Okay. For abundance of caution, do we have a motion to council to accept these meter locations?
I move approval of the meter locations as presented, adding Amy Patillo's residence and deleting Mike Dyson's residence and adding an additional residence if another participant is identified.
On Pickwick. If we can't, I'll tell you what, if we can't locate an additional address on Pickwick in the lower pressure plane, then please just go ahead and keep my address in there for the sake of getting it done. Okay. We have a motion. Thank you, Sarah.
Second.
Do we have a second from Amy? Council, do we have additional discussion? We'll call a vote then. Wendy?
Aye.
Amy?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Luck?
Aye.
Gavin?
Aye.
All right, motion carries unanimously. Thank you, council, and thanks to all the volunteers. Look forward to added efficiency in our water system. Call up item 7, discussion and possible action on a letter of support for City of Austin better utilizing investments to leverage development. It's their BUILD grant program application to the United States Department of Transportation. They're seeking $25 million to replace Redbud Trail. Redbud Trail is obviously has a regional impact on the city of Rollingwood, which I have no doubt is one of the reasons why the city of Austin has reached out to us. Council members Wendy and Amy, you guys have you are our resident experts, all things traffic. Can I get you to provide a little additional context for council here?
I will say that Amber brought this to our attention, that the City of Austin was asking for us to write a letter of support for this. And so we were just making sure that it got on the agenda in time to have the letter of support there for them by their deadline. So this is the Redbud Trail Bridge that if you go down Stratford and you go over Lake Austin on Redbud, that is the bridge that they're looking at replacing. And so this is supporting that grant application for getting funding to widen that bridge and add more pedestrian infrastructure to it. And the funding, I think, has been a questionable thing for all transportation projects. So I think they're trying to get some additional funding through this grant.
Great.
I agree
Thanks,
with.
Wendy.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
I agree with putting
No,
in
go ahead.
I agree with the need to put in a letter of support. Regionally, Campo is, I believe, putting in a letter of support, and the more support we can show for the different road projects in our area, the better. I think this is the one that I know of that most directly impacts our city. So I'm glad that we would have the opportunity to consider it.
I agree. It seems based on the plans that they presented, it does seem like well, it's a needed project for the region, and it does seem like it would certainly have a benefit to us here in Rollingwood. I would just really keep our fingers crossed that that project moves smoothly and quickly, as you know, traffic will be a little more difficult during construction phase.
For sure.
Council, you've heard a little bit of context. Do we have a motion?
I would move to approve the letter of support for a City of Austin build grant application to the U.S. Department of Transportation by the City of Rollingwood.
Do we have a
Second.
second, Kevin? We have a motion from Amy and a second from Wendy. Discussion, council?
Can we adjust the wording of this before we send it out? First of all, there's a whole paragraph at the bottom that says you could add more information here. So that at a minimum needs to come out. It's also written like it's coming from the City of Austin.
Sure.
And to me, if this is coming from us, it needs to make clear every place where it says the city is doing this, it needs to say Austin is proposing or the City of Austin, instead of it's confusing as whether it's coming from us or from Austin.
Really good point, Sarah. Perhaps we could have an understanding with this motion that we're drafting the letter in this spirit, such that the materially important information will be kept, but obviously written in Rollingwood's voice. It's a really good point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was my concern.
Agreed. Vote.
Okay. All right.
Do we
Wendy?
need to adjust the motion?
Did it say? Did you say the letter or a letter?
I don't recall.
I think you said a letter.
A letter.
I'm pretty sure you said a letter. And if we could just all agree the motion is a letter, I think we're good to go there. Do we have any additional conversation, council? In that case, I'll ask for the vote. Wendy?
Aye.
Amy?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Buck?
Aye.
Gavin?
Aye.
Great. Thank you, council. And thanks, Amber, for bringing it to our attention. Wendy and Amy, thank you very much for tackling it for us. Discussion and possible action on the agreement for the purchase of real property located at 503 Vale Street. So for context, guys, this, big picture wise, I think we've probably had some level of discussion about this property off and on for a year and a half, right? It's been an interesting piece of property. The folks that ended up buying 503 Vale had intended this for business investment that after subsequent reflection did not make a level of sense for them that they had originally hoped. What I have discussed personally with that owner is potential usages from the city. This came to the forefront recently as a result of the owner receiving another offer from a third party. They reached out to see if the city had any interest in acquiring the property. We expressed an interest. I expressed an interest, and that's the matter that you see now in front of you. Just big picture wise, guys. Again, I don't think this is news to anybody. We have spatial constraints in our current facilities. We have discussed for quite a while now, years, ways that we can alleviate some of those constraints. Cooper likes the idea. But as a landlocked city, we found ourselves with very few options. At one point, we went out and tested the market on office space, potential office space for the city, and found many of the rates almost cost prohibitive, if not actually cost prohibitive, throughout the city. So when presented with this opportunity, in my mind, it's very difficult for the city to say no to that. and bringing this here in front of council, hoping that you guys see the tremendous opportunity that's in front of us now. We do have a contract that is being contemplated at a sale price for this piece of property to the city at $1.2 million. If you were to take some time to look up on the appraisal district, you would see that it is far below appraised value, which is to say that it is fairly generous offer for the city that the property owner has made. With that, I'll open the floor to council.
First, Mr. Mayor, would you consider pulling up item 9 to be discussed in tandem with this proposal?
Yes, if that's helpful, absolutely. So we'll pull up 9, discussion possible action on the residential buyer representation agreement and associated rider for the city of Rollingwood.
All right, thank you. And we can come back to that in a bit. A couple of questions that I had. And I'm sorry I glanced at it, but remind me what the closing date is on the property.
Well, that's a great question. I apologize. That's moved around so many times.
That's no problem.
The idea would be subsequent to funding. Sorry, go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, no, they've sent a bunch of emails since.
Yeah, thanks.
Michael.
Thanks for bailing me out on that one. Yep.
But one of them did change the closing date to, I believe, July 31st would be closing date, which I believe would, if you're talking about the funding, my memory serves me and is outside the scope of my knowledge probably, but I think June is what we were talking about getting funded. So
that's right.
Okay.
The idea would be, sorry to interrupt, but the idea would be once, if approved, and our financial advisors were tasked with taking this to market, it would be approximately 60 days to adequately get this thing funded.
Okay. And what is the duration of, and this may have changed in the emails that Charlie was referencing, what is the duration of the option period, and when does that option period begin?
Also great questions.
So let me back up a little bit. Here, I can pull up emails. I'll pull up those emails so I can find them. But
thanks. Yeah, I'm pulling them up as well.
So that everybody knows, the agreement that's in front of you has a rider that was attached to it that I drafted for the city that says that it requires unanimous approval for this agreement to become effective. Means unconditional, but not unanimous, unconditional approval by the city council for this to be become effective. So to the extent y'all want to, and I'll pull up the emails to answer your question, Councilman Messingill, because I have it in here somewhere. But don't be concerned that if you want to approve this agreement and make changes to it, that you would be bound by its current terms, because you wouldn't be. We would negotiate any of the new terms.
Okay, that was my next question. Okay.
And seller's aware of that as well.
Okay. That said, I would be, and I'm leading to a different question, but I do think the option period is important before we. I mean, I assume it's drafted the same way in terms of earnest money versus option money.
I think the option fee was $300.
300, and the escrow was $12K.
That's correct.
Okay, and the reason I'm asking about the option period and 12 day, and the reason I ask when the 12-day option period would begin, I would assume it would be when we adopt the ultimate contract, not necessarily this contract. Is that right?
That is correct, yes, sir.
Correct.
We would, and as a matter of fact, I believe even, let me pull up my rider, so that I think I even drafted the rider to basically state that if you approved it unconditionally, the contract effective date would be the date of the unconditional approval of city council. So even if you approved it unconditionally, the effective date wouldn't be until your approval.
Okay.
But we can, and so if you don't, again, approve it unanimously, it's not effective, and we can change all those dates to make them consistent with your desired outcome.
And I just bring that up because I think, if we were to purchase this property, we need to know what the plan is, in the short term to utilize the property. But also, I know 7 to 10 days option period is typical for, the usual residential contract, but we're a much slower moving train than a typical residential buyer. So, to get your inspections done and to make sure that there's nothing that we're missing with the property.
And it is a $300 option, and it is a 12-day option period after the effective date of the contract.
Okay. And I guess I would be less concerned about 12 days if we can start, doing some inspections and doing a walkthrough and giving it some thought prior to our adoption, our final unconditional approval, then 12 days might be fine. But my main thing is if we were going to take action today and that started the clock on the option period, then I was going to suggest it be longer than 12 days.
And I would not recommend that you unconditionally approve this. First of all, the buyer, again, the seller has actually submitted a list of changes to the contract, which I've glanced at but did not review in depth. In depth, most of them look generally okay, but they would need to be incorporated into the agreement regardless.
So any action that we take under 8 this evening is really just an act of good faith to continue moving forward with the negotiation on the contract. Is that the right way to look at it?
Yes, sir. That is an accurate statement of what you would be doing.
Okay. I guess I'll go ahead and mention number 9 because it would probably inform my decision on 8 a little bit. And it's not really a big deal, but under the buyer's rep agreement on page 3, you see standard language there under item 11, broker's fees, subsection B. And again, this is standard promulgated language in these contracts. I know it says if such person refuses or fails to pay broker the amount specified, client will pay broker the amount specified less any amounts broker receives from such persons. That's standard language, and that's usually not a problem when properties are listed in MLS. This property is not listed in MLS, and we don't have a copy of the seller's agreement, which lays out the terms. So usually in the seller's agreement, the seller and the agent will come to terms on what the seller's agent is offering the buyer's agent. That exists, I'm sure, but we don't have access to that. And because it's not listed in MLS, we don't have any proof that the seller's contract, the seller's agreement, says that the seller will offer 3% to the buyer's agent. And so I would recommend striking this language that we would be on the hook in case it doesn't close. And that shouldn't be a problem because
Presumably they've already figured it out.
that, and also it's the same office that's on both sides of this deal. So they shouldn't care that we're taking it out.
Got it. I wouldn't anticipate that being a problem.
Yeah, I
with
don't
it
think,
being-
I absolutely don't think that it's a problem at all. I just, without us seeing it, I would be uncomfortable putting the city on the hook for that if that
Fair.
agreement doesn't exist the way we assume it exists on the back end.
That's fair.
And you have a similar rider for the buyer's rep agreement, do you not, Charlie?
I do.
And I would assume that's the same, basically the same processes of what we were talking about in 8, and that an action this evening is simply a good faith effort to move forward with the final negotiation on the buyer's rep agreement.
Yeah, it was similar in language in that it would have to be unconditionally approved by the city council.
Which is
and
not the action we're taking right now.
Which was not the action you're taking right now, especially considering the comments that you just had.
Okay.
If we're making little tweaks to this document, could we also change under the definitions on number 3, market area, just to say Travis County instead of just saying Travis, since that's not really a perimeter boundary?
Actually, let's see, where's it at? Actually, I included language that says in the rider, and we could include it, we'll make the same, I'll probably include a rider to the new agreement as well. And it says that client is engaging broker for the sole purpose to act as client's real estate agent for the purposes of acquiring residential property located at 503 Vale Street, Rollingwood, Texas, 78746. Okay. So it's not a market area exclusivity.
Okay.
Mayor, back to sort of just the overall concept. What should we view as the short term? And when I say short term, I mean the next year or two usage of this property.
Right.
And
I think
what type of time frame are we looking at actually putting it to good use?
Sure. I think the usage that makes the most sense is as relocation of our police department. The biggest detriment we have to our current location for our PD outside of size is we don't get any benefit from a level of visibility. It's probably not lost on anybody who's taken a couple minutes to think that is one of our primary ingress and egress points. Unfortunately, despite our high level of safety in the community, like any community, especially community juxtaposed to such a large area with a high population, we have incidences, and it doesn't take a lot of time to realize that many of those, if not most of those, actually materialize to that ingress and egress point. Not to mention, there's always annually, I suppose, the issues with Blues on the Green, ACL, Trail of Lights, just having that additional presence there, which we establish a presence there for those events anyway. There just seems to be a level of benefit to having a visual and actual physical presence at that specific location. Ultimately, I think and I hope that the council continues to explore opportunities to develop that entire area, which would bring more attention to our commercial district by providing safe passages through for patrons to Zilker Park and right into our commercial district. But probably more importantly than that, hopefully this can provide some level of additional solution, regional solution, when we go in and have conversations additionally with CTRMA and TxDOT with regards to pedestrian safety and additional patrol work. So that's the thought. We obviously, as I mentioned before, have just general spatial needs. We don't have enough space for the folks that we have, right? Freeing up space has been a conversation point that we've had. We undertook a needs assessment a couple of years ago, and we got that information back. I think the total need was in the ballpark of memory serves roughly 4,000 square foot. 1,800 square foot roughly was going to be needed for the PD. This current structure as it stands, Gavin, to your point, is probably more space than the PD needs. And then there's even a question we won't know the answer to it until we actually get in there and do some inspections and then put some thought behind it to know whether or not a conversion of the property makes sense to a PD. I hope that answers a large part of your question. The second portion of your question was, when do you think we can get started on it? My hope is that we get started using it and putting it to use immediately after close, right? So start figuring out how best to equip it and get the need satisfied, right? We already know what needs need to be sorted through. We just need to figure out the best way to do it. So I would argue that as soon as we close, it's then kind of incumbent on council and then the community. That'd be another important aspect, I guess, to consider too, is that the community is going to end up weighing in on this. If for no other reason, then I believe we're going to have to go through a rezoning process for this. Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong there. But for us to use this for municipal purposes, we'd have to rezone it from residential into government. Is that a fair understanding, Charlie?
I'd have to look at your zoning regulations, but certainly you would want to be consistent with the use.
Yeah, it seems likely, right? So more likely than not, that's going to trigger your public hearings and commentary from outside. So how quickly can we put it to use? It depends on, I hate to say it depends on kind of our resolve to get it put to good use. My hope is immediately, or as immediately as practically possible.
How quickly can we come to a conclusion on that rezoning issue, and does that stay in line with our July 31st closing timeline?
Publication notice before your rezoning process is a pretty long process. You've got to do your notice publications, got to go to P&Z, you got to get a recommendation, and then it's got to go to city council for final approval. So you figure at minimum a month and a half, probably.
That's 45 days in the 60 days that we were generally saying would be necessary to get this properly financed for the city anyway.
Assuming no special.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, Charlie, but it kind of goes back to my original point, which is it entirely depends, putting this into use entirely depends on our resolve to get it done.
Well, I think you need to go ahead and move forward with the postings on that. That's going to be part of the vetting process.
I don't know that we can move to rezone the property until it's, posting hearings on rezoning. And if it's still residential, if we don't close on the transaction or at least be engaged in the transaction, then I don't know that it's appropriate for us to start rezoning.
From a legal perspective, just so that you're aware, I'm comfortable with the city initiating, even though the city doesn't own the property, with the city initiating a city-initiated rezoning process, putting the notice out, having the public hearings, doing all of those things, so that by the time it comes to where you're ready to close, you've had all the appropriate stakeholder input, then you can actually do the rezoning and have it completed prior to the close. Might not be a bad idea to, just include as part of our agreement that the rezoning is a condition of purchase.
That was my next thing. That needs to be an option for us to terminate. Because I also wouldn't want for the option period to expire and we have to forego our earnest money if for some reason there's an outpouring from the community that they wouldn't want that zoning change. I don't anticipate that. I've had some conversations. They've all been positive. I think, Mayor, you've talked to.
I have subjected at least 30 different households just within the last week to my long-winded diatribes on this, and similar to you. And I leave open the idea that maybe I just didn't talk to the right one, but I didn't see. I received no negative feedback. Not just. I would say that everyone was either in favor or strongly in favor.
Charlie, will you remember to put that clause in the contract for termination?
Yep, already got notes. Yes, sir. I've already got notes on.
Thank you. Well, what do you want to do on 8 and 9 before we get to the hard part of 10?
I would like for council to approve the negotiating of a final purchase agreement with the obvious caveats that we've just discussed here this afternoon, considerations and provisions that we've just discussed this afternoon, with a final contract to be approved by council. I'd also ask that council approve the buyer's rep agreement, again, subject to striking the provision that you noted earlier, Gavin. And then I would ask that council consider doing that in consideration for your difficult one, as you noted in item number 10. The financing portion.
Who would we be approving to negotiate the final purchase agreement? Or do we need to say, or are we approving the mayor to negotiate it, or?
The mayor and I can deal with that, but the final contract will come back to you for final approval.
Right.
But in the motion, do I need to designate who is approved to negotiate it, or can I just move to approve a negotiation by the city?
Well, it's theoretically our agent.
Theoretically.
Correct.
Right. You don't need that in the motion unless you want a particular person other than your agent doing those negotiations.
No, I just wanted to make sure I clarified it.
I'd like Charlie at that table.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, my assumption would be that from a legal perspective, we would deal with all those on our side. We provide it to our representative, who would then present it to the other side. That's my assumption.
So I would move to authorize the mayor, city attorney, and the buyer's agent to negotiate a final purchase agreement with the caveats discussed during the council meeting today, with the final contract to be approved by the council.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Council, additional discussion?
Do I need to, does Amber Amber, are you deeply in that? Do I need to add Amber to that for her to be at the table, or can she be there to support?
I'm happy to have Amber at the table. In truth, she'll be looped into any bit of conversation, regardless as to whether or not you specifically designate her, if that's helpful
Okay.
to you at all.
I didn't mean to leave you out, Amber. I just was trying to make sure.
She
I
was
just want to make
probably
sure that,
one more thing
right.
getting dumped on the plate. Yeah.
Or I can remove the names, but I just want to make sure that we have the people who, we don't just have our agent there, but have the other people who will make sure that the different interests of the city are discussed.
Right. We have a motion and a second. Do we have additional discussion, council? All right. I'm not quite sure why, but all my little frames moved around on me. So, Wendy,
Aye.
Sarah,
Aye.
Buck, hey, Buck. I can't hear you, buddy.
Aye, sorry.
All right. Gavin,
Aye.
Amy,
Aye.
thank you, council. Can I also, as we've called up item 9 with the buyer's rep, can I encourage council to, again, approve that rep agreement, striking the provision that Gavin noted? Sorry,
I would move.
a little more specific there. In broker fees 11B, the bolded type under source of commission. So strike if such persons, sorry, let's get this in there. There it is. If such persons refuse or fail to pay broker the amount specified, client will pay broker the amount specified less any amounts broker receives from such persons.
Go for it, Amy.
So it's just, is it the second underlined sentence that we're striking?
Yeah,
but not the first sentence?
11B, under broker's fees, 11B, the bold type. So what B is suggesting is that the broker's fees
Got
can be paid by the seller, and in the instance they don't pay, then the client would pay. And what we've heard from Gavin, and probably, well, rightly, prudent for us to strike that, considering we haven't seen the seller side contract.
I was reading the first sentence to make sure that we wouldn't need to strike something if we take the second sentence out. So looking at it, I would say that in the first sentence, I would strike the word first after 11A, because it implies that there's a second if we leave the first in there, and then strike the second sentence.
Okay, I get you. Hey, council, everybody, and I guess most importantly, Charlie, do you see Amy's point there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, although typically I would just ask you to approve the agreement based on the discussion and then let me wordsmith it rather than y'all trying to wordsmith it while you're sitting in a meeting, but I'm happy to let y'all do that if you want.
More fun.
I don't really want to do that. I was just, if we needed to make the motion more specific, then I thought I should probably read the language before I made the motion.
A motion
So,
to approve the agreement with revisions as generally stated by Councilmember Massengill will be sufficient, and we'll wordsmith it to ensure it works.
okay, so I would move to approve the buyer's rep agreement subject to the strike request by Councilmember Massengill.
Second.
A motion from Amy and a second from Wendy. Discussion, council?
I'll just reiterate again, I don't foresee a problem with that, and I'm not saying there is one. So it's prudent for us since we have no ability to see it in MLS where that issue is usually settled up front.
Sure.
So for whatever it's worth, when I did my initial review, I had the same thoughts as Councilmember Massengill. I didn't perceive it to be a problem, so that's why I didn't recommend making that change. But perhaps I should have. But anyway, I noticed the same issue.
Yeah, no, it's not. And like I said, it's usually just handled. Everybody's clear up front when it's in MLS, but in this instance, we don't have that visibility. So I don't think it's a problem. I don't think it will be, and I'm not implying anything by it, but I think it's prudent for us to do it that way.
I appreciate you bringing up issues related to the sale not being a traditional MLS sale, and also that Charlie is looking at those issues as well.
All right. Any further discussion on the point? In that case, I'll ask for the vote. Wendy?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Buck?
Aye.
Gavin?
Aye.
Amy?
Aye.
Thank you, council. All right. Well, I think that leaves us bringing up item 10. That is, sorry. We've reached our max focus on a meeting, I'm guessing, by the sound of it.
Understatement.
Item 10. Discussion regarding the proposed issuance of City of Rollingwood tax notes, Series 2020, to provide financing for the acquisition of real property and drainage improvements and matters related thereto. So, guys, what you're looking at is kind of what I would recall or refer to as kind of an A and B scenario. The A being the Hubbard-Hatley cost. You may recognize that more readily as the Brainerd settlement. And just to recall or refresh, the city entered into a settlement agreement with the Brainards regarding drainage repairs through that area after establishing a regional drainage plan. What we're looking at right now, we have established that regional improvements plan through the IIP provided by K. Freeze. And what we're looking to do now is fulfill our obligations under that settlement agreement by attempting to fund development of that drainage through the area, through the region. So that's A. B is obviously what we have just discussed, the purchase of real property, potential purchase of real property. You've got, with A and B, you have two cost estimates. There you are. You have two cost estimates with some contingencies. There's, with A, we've got two different and arguably, initially my thought was substantially different bids, but in actuality, when you start to take a closer look, they come much closer together. The idea there would be to have contingencies upon contingencies for that drainage work. We have a cost estimate that's been provided by L&V. The total construction cost runs around $517,000 and some change, plus some engineering services and a very substantial contingency, 35%. If memory serves, L&V wanted a hardy contingency in there, largely because they didn't know without having gotten into the ground and kind of testing what they were going to come up against. That serves, and then we have the estimate in the IIP. That tear sheet suggested engineering at 57,000, construction at 312,000, other, which is the 10% contingencies, and then right-of-way and easements unknown for a total cost of 400,000. So again, it seems in its immediate phase, to be fairly disparate in cost, but when you kind of dig into the numbers, it's not quite as much as it might otherwise seem. In any case, in our history, construction can run a little bit higher and heavier than we generally have budgeted for previously. So what I would like council to consider here is going on the high side of the highest estimate, which is L&V's at 750,000, and then actually building on another 50,000 on top of that for an $800,000 total, in the sincere hopes that we don't come close to spending most of it. We'll spend most of it, but in the sincere hopes that we certainly don't spend all of it. That's the way of thinking there. And then again, the 1.2 million is what's been considered for the purchase of 503 Vale. That would total tax notes is by far not by far, but the only way that we could arrive at financing these projects, considering that the timeliness requirements of both. And that's why this option's sitting in front of you today.
Mayor, we do have our financial advisor, James Gilly, and
Great.
our bond counsel, Jerry Kyle, available.
Great. In that case, what I would like to do is open it up to council. I have no doubt, I mean, this is obviously a big decision. I have no doubt that council has thoughts or questions, and certainly directed towards me or James Gilly or, sorry, who did you say? We had our tax counsel. Is it?
Jerry Kyle.
It is Jerry. Okay, great.
Yes.
Great. Okay.
I have one quick question that I'd like to just lay out that can be answered at some point over this discussion. Am I recognized?
Yes, please. Sorry. You just started speaking. I'm just in the habit of recognizing when you do.
Sorry.
You're good.
A question either for Charlie or for bond counsel. If we were to approve tax notes for the, well, it would be for both projects, but I'm focused on the Hubbard Circle project. So if we earmark 800,000, say, for the Hubbard Circle project, and we get it done for 500,000, do we need to give specific consideration on how we issue those notes so that the remaining 300,000 can be spent on other IIP drainage projects, or would it just be available to us for those other projects regardless?
I'm going to defer to your bond counsel.
Okay. I just you don't have to answer it straight off, but at some point in the discussion, I'd like to know that.
I think it's a great question, Jerry, if you're available.
Sure, Mayor Dyson, and I agree that's a great question. Generally speaking, we have to provide a certain degree of specificity to the Texas Attorney General when the notes are issued. So the statement of purpose would presumably be something along the lines of, acquisition and improvement of a building for a new police station. And then the drainage would be generally stated as drainage improvements. So
Is this what goes to the bond review board?
The bond review board, all they really get is there's a report that we submit with the transcript that basically the bond review board collects information about the offering, but that's really all they do. They have a very limited role in this. But in terms of surplus, the surplus could then be used for one of those two general purposes. So if you had a surplus after you finish the drainage project, you could use any remaining surplus for additional other drainage improvements, or if you had improvements to the house that you're looking at buying, you could use the surplus from the drainage over for the improvements to the building. Or the other thing you can do with surplus is put it in the debt service fund to pay debt service on your notes.
Okay. Thank you.
That was actually the same questions I was having, so appreciate you asking that.
I appreciate you appreciating me for asking.
Yeah. If we weren't so socially distanced, I think it would be time for hugs. But given that, what other points do we have to discuss on this council? I can tell you that I did work with James and Amber and Jerry to figure out what alternatives there were, and Charlie for that matter, what alternatives there were for funding. And the short answer is we don't have many options, and this is what it came down to. So,
can you talk to us, Mayor? I understand the dollar amounts, but can you give us your take on the different strategy between scenario 1, the level debt service, versus scenario 2, structured principal? And I understand what the difference is, but why? What are the pros and cons of each one? Yeah.
You bet. Yeah. So we've been discussing at the city for years, and not just discussing, we've actually been taking action at the city level for years to get a really good understanding of what our needs are, right? So we, under Mayor McKee, we got started our needs assessment, which was an assessment on, for City Hall and the structural needs for City Hall and our PD, what that looked like. That obviously comes with a price tag. It's a shockingly high price tag, in my personal opinion. But we also know that through the IIP that we have considerable infrastructure costs for drainage that we need to consider. We also know that we have infrastructure needs with regards to our water lines, right? I mean, we're in the middle of undergoing yet another study to figure out where, as Councilmember Padilla likes to say, our gremlins exist in our water lines and our water system. We do have, besides the fact that we have a lot of construction going on in our city, one of the reasons why we do experience as many water line ruptures as we do is that we have aging water lines. It's just that simple, and the lines that we do have are not only aged, but they're not necessarily have been sunk to an appropriate or an ideal depth. So we do know that water lines, even up and down any number of cul-de-sacs, have never been replaced, right? So we know we have these infrastructure needs. One of the big reasons that we're putting all these things together is so that as a community we can come together and get our head around what needs need to be addressed during what time frame, and with specific regards to just basically a cost benefit analysis for the city, right? We know that this drainage may be an issue. Is it an issue at $5 million? We know that water lines need to be replaced. Do they need to be replaced now, or an arbitrary $1.5 million. I say arbitrary. That's simply because we haven't performed a full analysis on those costs yet, right? That all leads us to one big question, or one realization at some point. We don't have funds for those big ticket items, and that's going to ultimately lead us to considering some kind of bond referendum, right? And the question would be, we know we've all been building to this. We haven't had a discussion publicly, not to my satisfaction, I'm sure not to the satisfaction of anyone on this dais either yet, and that's largely because we don't know all the specifics. And I think we owe each and every community member a very specific accounting of every dollar that we intend to take on in debt, right? So I know you guys generally feel the same way, which is why we've been very systematic and methodical about going about this process. But that's what we're ultimately building towards. And at one point, prior to the world turning on its head, we had actually considered talking to the community about a potential bond referendum at some point during this year. And obviously that's unlikely to happen for a number of reasons, not the least of which is kind of what we're experiencing right now. But that said, we're still looking at a potential bond referendum at sometime in the near future, perhaps in 2021. In that, to answer your question very specifically, what you have in front of you are two different options that allow council to basically, one, pay for just these tax notes on kind of an open market approach. And I'll let James jump in and really add the intelligence behind this, the expertise, I suppose. And then the other option you have is to recognize that this bond package and bond referendum is something that inevitably the city is going to need. In what specific amounts and for what specific projects, those are still a little bit up in the air, too much up in the air to tie down specifically. But one of the options there would be to refinance these current tax notes under that bond with those bond monies and actually be able to lower the rates on the monies that have been borrowed through the tax notes. So that's
the
big
bottom
picture.
line between, but the bottom line between scenario 1 and scenario 2 is a savings of $30,000 over the life of the bond, right? Or the life of the note.
Yes.
Okay.
And, yeah. And if that's all you wanted to know, you should have just asked me that specifically.
I was trying to throw you a softball, dude.
We would have all saved 15 minutes. I tell you, I feel bad for all the households. That's the conversation that everybody had to listen and bear through with me when talking about whether or not this was the right tack for the city. At the end of the day, either approve just to shut me up or approve that's a good idea. In any case, yes, bottom line, save money.
Quick question for bond counsel, and this kind of goes back to the question I had a minute ago. I don't know if you're looking at our agenda. Are you?
Yes, I.
So if you'll see the third item down under our agenda item 10 that we're on, the third item down is the IIP cut sheet that the mayor referenced a moment ago. Shows 400,000 estimated cost. Is that information enough for us to provide to the AG? Like if we had this project at 400 and then maybe 2 or 3 others that we would try to accomplish with this 800,000 portion of these notes, would that be in addition to whatever we needed to show on the building structure that we would purchase? But would this type of cut sheet be enough background information to provide for the AG to allow us to spend the remaining dollars for those other projects until we ran out of the note?
Yes, sir. Well, so the AG doesn't get that deep into the weeds. Really, they'll just look for a description of purpose that's specific enough for them to feel comfortable that they understand what the proceeds are being used for. So in this case, drainage improvements and the acquisition of the building for the police station.
Okay, so that would be enough to give us ample flexibility for the remainder of that 800,000 if we ended up with remainder.
To be used for other drainage projects, yes.
Yes. Okay. Great. Okay. So can you talk through scenario 2, structured principal, and the INS sinking rate and what that looks like over the course of the 7 years?
James, I think that might be for you, bud.
Certainly. Would you mind repeating the question, or just so I can?
Sure. Just if you would just talk through with us what the and Amber can jump in as well. What the INS rate would look like over year to year for the 7-year duration of the note.
Just for a little bit of background, in conversations with Amber and Abel and the mayor, they came to us with this with the opportunity to purchase this property, and we, in determining which the best method for sale, we suggested that it may be possible to take these to a direct market. A direct placement, offer these as a direct placement, also known as a private placement, and in which individual banks and financial institutions would be purchasing these from the city and holding them for their own account. And there are advantages and disadvantages to that approach, but one advantage in this situation is that the city could be able to ask for flexibility with respect to a call feature, an optional redemption, and additionally, generally speaking, the city has a pretty great deal of flexibility with respect to structuring the amortization schedule, the principal repayment, and of course, with more aggressive, you can think of it similarly to your mortgage, your house mortgage. The more aggressively you retire principal, the lower the interest costs are over the life of the loan. And to that extent, so that's just a long way of saying the city it's a policy decision on the part of the city. It's a business decision how you wish to structure the retirement, the principal retirement, to best suit your needs and to best suit your future needs, any anticipated capital projects in the future. So I'm not sure if that answered your question.
The way it helped me, Gavin, to understand, James is obviously very much an expert in an area that I'm still fledgling. But the way it helped me to understand this was really by going one route over the other. It provided a level of optionality with regards to refinancing these tax notes in arguably an aggressive fashion that similar to what City Council undertook refinancing, I guess, the better part of a year ago now with huge cost savings under, I believe it was a 2012, was a 2012B bond. So that is an option, as James spelled out to us, or to me anyway, that would be provided under this private placement route, allowing us, again, as you kind of suggested, Gavin, saving us some money down the road on this.
Now, is scenario 1 for the level debt service, is that a private placement also?
Yes, sir. Both of these scenarios they're just different debt service structures, but because of the time sensitive nature involved, and because of the possibility that the city may wish to refinance or restructure the debt service at a later date, Both of these scenarios assume a direct placement. And the reason is that with a direct placement, we found that these financial institutions, these investors are give a greater deal of flexibility with respect to your optionality, your call features, or your ability to early or fund or refinance these obligations, such as these tax notes.
And I'm sure this is standard, and it's maybe a dumb question, but I noticed that your first interest payment is noted on 2/1 of 2020, and your first principal payment is on 8/1 of 2021. Explain the backdating on the first interest payment.
Yes, that's that should actually be to 2021. That was an earlier draft.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So, but that's an excellent question. But the city pays on its existing debt service. The city pays its principal payments on August 1st, and its principal and interest on August 1st, and then an interest payment on February 1st. So this structure would assume that the city wouldn't make a payment until next year after. So essentially, it would be outside of this fiscal year, so that it wouldn't impact your existing existing budget.
Gotcha. Okay.
So thank you for pointing that out.
I'll just make this point and then open it up. Somebody else can jump in. I've talked too much, but I mean, obviously the thing that is most, I guess, interesting to me is looking at the required INS tax rate on debt service starting in 21. Under scenario 1, you start at a 3-cent increase to INS, and then it ramps down to 2.6 cents in year 7, versus scenario 2, which you're looking at a 5-cent bump to the INS rate in year 1, 2021, and then a 5-cent in 2022. But then in year 3, you're golden, and you bump down to 1.9 cents, and then it stays roughly at that level for the remainder of the note. So I think, in my mind, and we can talk more about it after others weigh in, but that's what I'm looking at mostly here is the 3-cent bump down to 2.5 or 2.6 over the life of the note in scenario 1, versus 2 tough years of 5 cents, but then down to 1.9 in year 3. And I have more thoughts on that, but I won't say them until I hear where the rest of council is.
Well, council, I'll open it up to anybody else that does have thoughts.
I have a question for Gavin.
What you got?
So can you spell out for me then, you're looking at these 2 different changes in the INS. So are you looking at that in terms of if we were to go out for bond, which one is better, versus if we didn't end up going out for bond, which one is better?
No, I'm actually looking at it from cost to the residents.
Okay.
I personally feel like we need to evaluate this based on what's on the table. And I agree with the mayor wholeheartedly that at some point we're going to have this discussion about the larger discussion with relation to a bond package. But I actually think that we need to probably evaluate what's in front of us. You know, the property, and the Hubbard project, which I'm, I sort of have a personal, not personal, other than my integrity, stake in seeing that project through, because I do think that we negotiated in good faith to reach a settlement, and I feel like we need to follow through on that settlement for Hubbard Circle. In my mind, I would like to try to, I don't think that project should cost $750,000. I don't think it should cost $700,000. I think it should cost $400,000. And, you'll hear me complain if it goes much over that. But, in my mind, if we could, follow through on our commitment on the settlement and get that Hubbard project done, which, by the way, we talk about it in terms of one particular property, but if you look at that, the reason that we engaged in that discussion from a regional perspective is it doesn't just help one property. It helps, roughly 14 to 17 properties in that drainage area. So it is, and it's a definite problem. It solves a regional problem. And if we could do that for the 400,000, that would be great. And then if we had 400,000 left over to try to knock out one or two or three other of our IIP drainage projects, I think that's awesome. And I think it shows that we're putting our money where our mouth is, and we didn't just go through the pain of an IIP process to then not do anything with it and put it on the shelf. So I think those are important things. And I think the space needs for Rolling Wood are legit. And I can probably, as long as the neighbors around that area of Vale are good with it, I could get comfortable with, I think we're getting a good deal on the property itself. So I'm comfortable with that. But all of that said, I think we need to evaluate what's in front of us based on the projects that are in front of us, as opposed to really spending a lot of time of thinking about how to roll it into a future bond package or something like that. If we buy that property and then have 2 or 3 or 4 other drainage projects with that $800,000, that honestly keeps us busy for a few years, just working through all of those issues. And then we can then make a next decision on phase 2 about a bigger bond issue later on. The thing I like about the tax notes is it's a little bit painful from a financing standpoint, but it's over in 7 years too. Like, you're done. We paid for it all in 7 years. So really what I'm getting at with the INS is I like scenario 2 because you are front loading those principal payments and you end up saving $30,000 or so over the 7-year life of the notes. But I will be honest with y'all, and I like the fact that in year 3 it goes from 5-cent bump down to 1.9. But I'll be perfectly honest with y'all, if we were to go with scenario 2, I'm going to squeeze that budget like a turnip, because I am not comfortable with saddling the residents with all of that cost in year 1 and 2 to the tune of 5 cents on the INS rate. But my goal would be to try to squeeze that budget, and what gets automatically rolled into the INS rate, if we were to adopt this scenario 2, I would plan to try to come back and claw some of that back in the M&O rate on the M&O portion of our budget, to mean it is already a pretty lean budget, as Amber reminded me today when I had this conversation with her, and she was getting very nervous about where I was going with this discussion. But it would be my intent to propose a very lean budget that actually reduces the M&O rate to some extent, to try to make up for the increase on the INS side.
So I've got a hand raised, and I'm going to take it down. Gavin, I agree with almost everything you said, with one caveat. It's very difficult for us to pull this out of the bigger conversation and have these as individual items that stand alone, right? We didn't do just a regional plan for Hatley Hubbard or Hubbard Hatley Pickwick as it's being referred to in our IEP, right? We did a city plan for that. We did a needs assessment for all of municipal city needs, right? The reason why we're having this discussion now on tax notes for these two items is because for various reasons, again, we couldn't get all the known costs that we're building up in front of our city and our citizens in a reasonable amount of time. And then these two items, I say a reasonable amount of time, in time enough for everybody for us to have fully vetted them and then be able to explain them for everybody to properly digest, right? These two items became time sensitive. And so in my mind, that's why I say, we're trying to approach this as a city from a comprehensive standpoint. These two items got pushed forward through need. That doesn't necessarily absolve the city of these additional needs. And I hear you when you say that this is going to keep us busy for a little while, but I'm pretty confident that our city staff can both walk and chew gum, and thereby handling more than one project at a time.
I don't disagree with that. But my point is, you're going to have significant work ahead of you just with what's in front of us tonight. And if you, and when I say you, I mean we, the city. If we actually start showing progress on some projects and some drainage projects, it is going to be easier to go have that dialogue with the rest of the residents for the rest of these projects related to the bigger bond package. But I just don't. I don't think today's decision or the decision before us in the next 30 or 45 days should be totally. I mean, yes. Does it dovetail nicely with what we might do in the future related to the bigger bond pack? Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's the right call to make it private placement so that we have maximum refinancing options down the road. All I'm saying is, I don't think that we need to evaluate it and make a decision in the next, over this time period with these two projects. My point is, if they can't stand on their own today, then I'm not interested in doing it. But I do think they stand on their own today, and I think that they dovetail nicely with what is to come. But my only point is, if I didn't feel like they stood on their own today, I would not vote for them for some grander cause. That's my only point.
Yep.
Amy, I have no idea if that even remotely answered your question.
Well, I do think it explained. I was trying to figure out when you said that you were looking at these two different drops and then you would let other people talk. I wasn't sure exactly what other factors you were putting together with those drops.
Yeah.
So I think that you've answered that now, and that's been helpful. Yeah.
I'm seeing that 5-cent INS rate in year 1 and 2 under scenario 2, and it gives me some pause. That's where I am. And I
Oh no, we lost Gavin.
I didn't do it, man. There he is.
The speaker.
Oh.
Turns out when someone calls me, it turns off. So, so my point was, I'm looking at that 5 cents in year 1 and 2 under scenario 2, and it's giving me some heartburn. And I'm just saying, I'm letting everybody know that if we go that route, which I could probably get there, we're going to have, I'm going to be a little bit more mindful and hawkish when it comes to our budget process this year, because my goal is going to be to claw some of that 5 cents back out of the M&O side of the budget.
And I appreciate the conversation of how do you, like, making sure these are standalone projects that we're going to approve, because we're voting on them today, and especially with there's a limited amount of information that we can rely on right now, and things are changing, and so we have to make a decision based on what we know today and an understanding of what we may know a month from now or 2 months from now.
Right.
So I think that assuring that these projects on their own with the data that we have in front of us today are worth pursuing, and then making a decision on how we finance them is a really important discussion.
Yeah.
And I also tend to agree on scenario number 2, even though it is a little bit of heartburn. And we are facing some unknowns, but it positions the city to move through the cost of paying for these projects more quickly and allows a little more flexibility in the future.
Yeah. And my only point is, if we're willing to really tighten our own belts for 2 years on our M&O budget, then everyone's better off year 3, because year 3 under scenario 1 is 2.8 cents, and year 3 in scenario 2 is 1.9 cents. So, we're a penny better off in year 3 if we're just willing to, like, really be judicious and tighten our own belts in year 1 and 2 under scenario 2, and still have the overall savings of the interest that you would gain from that as well.
Well, and perhaps by then Travis County will figure out how to actually appraise properties.
Yes, my assumption is that they will. And to that point, I mean, when I say claw it back in the M&O rate, I mean, there are some extra dollars that will be on the revenue side. We've got phase 3 of Endeavor that will have fully come on by then. It wasn't fully on the rolls last time. So, I mean, it's not going to be easy. Under current circumstances, it would be about a 10% budget cut to the M&O side, which would be difficult for us to get there. But once you look at, other new homes that have come on, what's new on the rolls, what's new with the Endeavor coming fully onto the tax rolls. I mean, it may not be as hard to at least get a portion of that back. And when I say get it back, I'm talking about trying to
bring us back to current rates, closer.
Yeah. And trying to offset, trying to offset some of that cost that will be seen by the taxpayer and get it down.
One of the big things that I'm hoping that this council and our community will really continue to invest in is the low-hanging fruit that is our commercial district, right? And there's a reason why we underwent study via retail coach. There's a reason why our planning and zoning is taking a look at how our zoning schema exists up and down our commercial corridor, right? And the idea is that hopefully we can provide a greater level of optimization up and down there, which will ultimately take some of the burden off of our residential taxpayers as well. Right? And I probably don't need to tell anybody on this dais that 20% of our revenues come from sales tax, 80% property tax, 64% of the total budget comes from residential property taxes. That's a heck of a burden. And what we haven't done successfully anyway is shift that weight over into the commercial side of things, right? Increasing sales tax primarily there, encouraging $7 million appraised properties to build out to $100 million appraised properties, right? Those are the options that we'll have as a community to decide whether that's a right fit for our community. But that pressure relief valve that you're talking about, Gavin, that's the lowest hanging fruit. I know we run a really tight budget already, and we're very conservative in our approach with a number of these things. Probably important, really important for us to also remember that despite that imbalance in our sales taxes and our property taxes, we still only tax our residential and our properties at not even 45% of what the city of Austin does, right? So relatively, we are low, artificially low. I'd love for us to be able to keep it there. I think we have the ability to do that, but I think the only way for us to really do it intelligently and for the long run is kind of, as you said, Gavin, you got to tighten that belt, make some difficult decisions, and then invest those monies intelligently to improve the overall bottom line, right? If we start taking out a bunch of debt and sinking it into items that don't really improve our bottom line all too very much and show a positive return, I don't know that that's the best course of action for us. I appreciate the fact that nobody on this dais is going to make this decision lightly, right? At the end of the day, none of us as taxpayers want to spend more money than we absolutely have to, I'm sure, let alone pass any of that burden on to our friends and neighbors. So, again, I hope that this doesn't come across to anybody as any kind of knee-jerk reaction or sudden decision. It certainly isn't that, and I can appreciate the idea, Gavin, that yeah, we are as a city council and as a community trying to turn this ship in an intelligent and thoughtful manner. In any case, that's my 2 cents on it.
Mayor, I was informed by Charlie that he has another council meeting he needs to leave for, and then it looks like Buck has his hand raised.
Okay.
Yes. Sorry, Mayor, but I didn't realize this was going to run 3 hours, and I need to bounce as well.
All right. Well, we've had a considerable amount of discussion on this point. Do we have? Are we inclined to take action here, or do we have additional conversation?
Hey, I just checked the agenda item, and item 10 just says discussion. It doesn't say discussion and possible action.
Right. We don't need action tonight, but just wanted to have discussion so we understand direction, so we can proceed.
All right, awesome. Does that mean I can bounce?
It does.
Hugs and kisses.
Thanks, Buck.
Laters. Thanks.
Sorry, y'all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlie.
Hey, Charlie.
Don't do anything wrong while I'm gone.
Never.
Okay.
We've got bond counsel. He'll keep us straight.
That's my biggest concern. Thank you all. Bye.
Is Charlie off yet? I have something to.
Okay, I'm all right.
Okay. Well, we have a lot of information in front of the council. Do we feel comfortable based on all of this? We don't have to take action, but obviously we probably should let, with some level of definitiveness, staff and both James and Jerry know kind of where things are going to lie down, and me for that matter, as I'm going to have to talk with the seller, and we're going to want to, at some point in the near term, reach out to start the conversations with the folks impacted with Hubbard, Hatley, Pickwick drainage project.
I'm inclined to follow the lead of the budget guru.
Who's that?
I'm just trying to get good points, so when budget season comes around, I might get something on the.
Well, if we do this, there won't be any need for any exception.
Oh,
so.
You're right. You're right.
This is the exceptional item. Just
Agreed.
FYI.
I think I already voiced my inclination towards structure 2 or scenario 2, the structured principle.
Okay. Wendy, Sarah? Nod.
Yeah, my only concern is the impact on some of our residents with accelerating the payments, and with the current state of the economy and not knowing how many people here are impacted by layoffs or, you know, salary reductions or what, you know, everybody's budget is liable to be a lot tighter this coming year or two than it has been in the past. And so that is a concern.
You bet. Yeah, no, it's, again, this is not a decision any of us should make lightly.
And I echo that. And that's, I mean, what Sarah just said is where I'm coming from.
Right. Okay. Well, there's no action to be taken. It does.
I mean, we
seem
get
like.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go for it. I was just going to say, it seems that council is generally in favor of living up to the obligations under the settlement statement, fixing that regional problem through the Hubbard, Hadley, Pickwick area. We know we're going to have to pay for that. And then we've actually already approved the negotiation, pending approval, obviously, of the Rollingwood purchase, or sorry, the 503 Vale purchase. So it sounds to me that the bigger question that still remains is whether or not we want to take kind of option 1 or option 2. Is that fair?
That's fair.
So
Yes.
and by option 1 or option 2, I mean level or structured, right? Okay. All right. Amber, James, does that give you guys enough direction? Do you need anything? You guys have any questions on next actions, next steps?
Well, as Gavin mentioned, if he's going to be looking for ways to claw back some of that debt service out of the O&M budget, I would prefer that y'all would go after the level debt service option then, so that way it's not as difficult. I mean, y'all know we do run a tight ship here, and there's just not
easier. Just out of curiosity, would this have been easier if we had a benevolent benefactor, a 501c3 that was donating, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of dollars to park maintenance? Would that have helped us in this scenario, Gavin?
Chair is not advised.
Potentially. It might have added literally hundreds of thousands of dollars that could have offset our O&M budget and thereby actually allowed us to have a level of wiggle room to make these kinds of improvements at the city.
Your comments are noted.
Got it. Okay. I'm just trying to figure out what optionality we can bring to the city and hopefully have intelligent conversations with our community members so that they understand the impacts properly and understand the impacts of decisions that we make. That's my only point. Sorry,
Well, and Amber, I think Amber knows where I'm going to go, and so I'm open to that. You're correct, Amber, in that what you suggest would be easier, because I'm going to try to claw back out of scenario 1 too, and it would be easier to get savings from 3 cents than it is from 5.
I'd rather find 3 cents than 5 over 5 cents.
I understand.
That will be a lot easier to do.
So I guess I'm wondering on the direction that we need to give. What is the next step that would happen? Can we have both of these scenarios come back in a more formal way, or do we need to choose one right now? Because if we're not really taking action, we're just giving direction. What is the next action step we would take on this?
Yeah, I'm confused by that too. I mean, it looks like what we have in front of us, isn't that what you would do?
I can offer a thought on that if you'd like. Based on my understanding of the notion that we were going forward with a private placement, and we would come back on the May 20th meeting, then and James, please jump in if you disagree, but I think the bid specs would contemplate an amortization. So unless y'all were going to have a meeting between now and then, I think we would need to understand kind of what kind of amortization you're looking for.
Yes, that's Jerry. Thank you. That's correct. Generally speaking, if the council were to give us direction tonight, and this would be in line with my understanding of the time-sensitive nature. If the council were to give us direction this evening, we would begin drafting and finalize an offering document, a term sheet, and distribute that to, as I said, investors for their review, for their due diligence review. And generally, we would be asking these investors to submit bids on a particular structure and a particular dollar amount. And we would schedule a sale date or a date to take bids on. For example, I think the scenario you're looking at suggests that we take bids are due on the next council meeting, I think a regular council meeting date in May. And so we need, I guess it's a long way of saying that we need a few weeks of lead time for council to make a decision. You don't have to make a decision now, but it's just a matter of depending on when the city needs funding for these projects. And for example, my understanding is that the property purchase is one of the most time-sensitive needs.
What do you need from us on amortization, though? Aren't they both amortized over 7?
I'm sorry. By amortization, I meant the principal structure, the repayment structure. But yes, you're correct. They're both over 7 years.
I mean, if the goal is to try to find the delta on the O&M, I mean, we can't do the front-loaded structured principal option because today our O&M tax rate is just under 12 cents. So if we tried to find 5 of those 12 cents in there, I don't know that we could do that.
And I don't know that I would try to find all 5 in fairness, but
you'd
need to find at least 2 or 3, right? If you're able to find, you get it down to option 1. If you find 3, you've beaten option 1.
That's correct. I would shoot for a minimum of 2 and try for 3. And I know that's tough. I mean, I get it, everybody. I understand that's tough, but But I think it's the only argument that we can go back to our community. I mean, with the economy looking like it's going to look for the next 18 months, I'm not comfortable going back to the.
You don't have to justify, Gavin, in that I would argue that what we have set ourselves on a course to do and really done, putting our foot down, put on the accelerator the last year and a half, has been exactly that, to increase our efficiencies, to really refine our processes, find where we can save those dollars, right? That's why we have the staff that we do. Yeah, it's, again, you're not wrong in any of that. I don't think you're going to find much disagreement, actually, in the approach either. And I would offer that's one of the reasons why I've tried to emphasize the importance of us figuring out how to encourage revenue into our city, because as you correctly noted, you have correctly noted, we're already razor thin. We're razor thin, and at some point you have to pay for roads, you have to pay for water lines, you have to pay for infrastructure. And if you want to try to advance any of that, so you're not heaping additional infrastructure debt on debt that we still haven't paid off for infrastructure, then you have to decide how to invest some dollars that, I'll be the first to tell you, timing sucks. But, those needs don't necessarily care. Sorry, Amy, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, my question, I don't know enough about structured principal arrangements to know, so my question is, could we do a 0.04 for the first 2 years instead of a 0.05 and still achieve a similar drop off in the last 5 years? Or how, I wonder what the differences would be if we took that first number, those first 2 years down just slightly, but it was still in a structured principal format.
Yeah, I'll answer that if that's okay. Yeah, the short answer is yes. You could, if you recall, with the 2019 refunding bonds, council directed us to size the refundings to match the existing debt service tax rate at the time. And so, yes, essentially, if you instructed us to target a certain tax rate on the proposed tax notes, we could, to some extent, to a large extent, we could propose a structure that would attempt to match that, to attempt to achieve that result.
Okay, so is there a happier medium between where Gavin is and the concerns Amber has that you guys looked at for a structured principal, or what was the basis for that initial structured principal number? I guess those are two questions. Sorry. I guess my first question is, what was the basis for the first structured principal amount, and then is there a number that maybe Amber would see that we could reduce from M&O potentially, and that would satisfy Gavin? I know we're not going to get to that number right now, but I'm kind of wondering if we need to give y'all direction so that we're ready for the next council meeting. And I'm hearing what Amber's saying now, and hadn't fully appreciated that side. I'm hearing what Gavin is saying. So I'm not sure if I'm as confident in the position I was taking before.
James, isn't there a cost savings via interest if you do the structured principal the way that it was proposed?
Yes,
30,000 currently. Go ahead.
Yes, generally speaking, I'm sorry, Mayor, go ahead.
No, it's okay. It's fine. Go, please, James.
I was going to say that, yes, generally speaking, that with a more aggressive principal retirement structure, the total interest costs carried over the life of the loan are going to be smaller. So yes, you're correct, Amber.
And then James, the other part of her question was, is there, could we look at another scenario? And your answer is sure, sure, you could insert whatever tax rate the council would like to look at, correct?
Absolutely. If council gave us direction on I'll say a sweet spot of a INS rate, a tax rate that would require to support the tax notes, we could target that and try to achieve that within reason. So, of course, we don't know what the final debt service would be at this point until we receive bids, but we do have some flexibility to be able to target that once the winning bids are received. So we could get pretty close.
So Gavin, would you have any interest in seeing a structured principal with lower numbers for those first 2 years, but maybe we don't save quite as much? Or is the savings what is enticing about the structured principal right now?
I mean, the savings is good. I mean, but it's only 30,000 or 27,000 over 7 years. So, I mean, it's not earth shattering, honestly.
I'm just thinking now for the squeeze that we would put on ourselves maybe over the next 2 budget years. I don't know that amount of savings is as significant to me. And to Mayor Dyson's point, hopefully we continue to look for ways for the community to participate in ways that they could actually deduct on their taxes as well through donations to a foundation that, instead of things that increase our property tax that most of us have a cap on or deductions on. So I'm just wondering if we lower that structured principal down, but still get a little bit of the benefit from it, but also don't have to cut quite as much. It sounds like whether we went with option 1 or option 2, you're saying that you'd be looking for ways to cut that out of the budget. And option 2 looks like basically we're just going to cut an amount out for 7 years, versus scenario 2, maybe we're just reducing for 2 years, or we're looking for ways for the community to participate and contribute in contributions. I mean, the park is a great example of an area where we have a pretty large M&O, and that if we had a foundation that people can contribute to, that they could also receive a tax benefit from it.
Yeah, no, I like how you're thinking.
It's also important to bear in mind, guys, that if we do this properly, we should be seeing some level of budgetary relief from an uptick from our commercial district as well, right? Both in a development standpoint and ideally a sales tax standpoint as well. So it's, one of the natural occurrences, I'm sure. I hope this hasn't been lost on anybody, that this downturn, one of the things that Retail Coach pointed out to us in their study was how many of our companies and businesses exist on a month-to-month. I think it would be silly for us to not think for a second that the people that own those pieces of property largely have decided not to redevelop because those tenants have been consistent, even on a month-to-month, with revenue sources. If that were to wane as a result, especially of a contraction of our economy that we may or may not see, we'll have to wait, see what the numbers bear. But I think it would be, I can't imagine that many of our property owners who have been potentially weighing redevelopment of their commercial properties up and down Bee Caves Road do not see this as good a time as any to do it, especially if they start seeing a contraction in their revenue sources. So just food for thought that I don't think we're just going to see a change over the next 18 months in a down cycle, but you know, without seeing the bounce back, I guess over the next couple of years. To that point, to both Amy and Gavin, if again going back to the resolve that we have as a community to kind of see that through, if we're willing to see that through and make the changes that we've discussed, and even P&Z is contemplating now, really thinking long and hard about our zoning through our commercial corridor. Maybe you guys are right. If you're willing to see that through, then a little bit less now, and see if we can't increase our the size of our coffers through other means over the next couple of years. It's possible.
Well, I know we don't have any numbers to look at, but I guess I'm just looking at something that would split the difference between the two would be if we had a structured principle of 0.04 or around there for the first 2 years. I know that means that we would increase for the other 5 years, but I just wonder if that might get us to a place where we know that we're going to potentially look at some ways to either come at it from the budget or look at ways to fundraise in other places. And it wouldn't put as much pressure on our budget coming up on what could be some down years, but we don't know.
So if we can't take action today, what are we trying to get to tonight?
Direction for James to put together an offering that gets us to an INS rate that we're comfortable with. So what we have in front of us are two different scenarios that James has provided. From what I can hear, Amy has just offered or opened the door to what if we consider a third scenario that comes in more of the hybrid of the two. Is that or
I'm just,
middling?
yeah, I'm trying to weigh the different things that have been discussed, because I kind of came into it having looked at it with the opinion that structured like scenario 2 I felt comfortable with, but having heard some discussion and more information, I'm more inclined to continue to ask some questions, and so just trying to see what we could find in the middle ground. But everyone else may be comfortable still moving forward with scenario 2, and that's fine as well.
Why don't you come up with the scenario 3 that bumps the principal payments in years 1 and 2, or 1, 2, and 3, that achieves a little bit of a hybrid, but don't let your INS in years 1 and 2 go above 4. In fact, I'd keep it slightly below 4.
Okay, so that's certainly something that we can do if that's your direction, or we can certainly run a calculation and an estimate to target a structure where the tax notes in years 1 and 2 require an increase in INS rate of just under 4 cents. Is that my understanding?
I think so. I think that would get closer to a hybrid. So you're front loading a little bit more principal, but not as much as in scenario 2 currently.
I feel comfortable with that.
And still leave scenario 1 so we can compare it. I mean, literally yeah, you can still circulate it to us.
At a base case scenario, right?
Yeah.
So assume right now you've got your bear and your bull being the 5 cents, the bear being the 3. What's our base at 4 look like? There's your middling, right? And my apologies, council. I may have misunderstood or misread, and maybe I just did not take enough into account the dramatic change that we've just gone through potentially over the last month and a half. I made the assumption that you guys would want to consider being as aggressive as we have previously, but you're not wrong to suggest that maybe circumstances are different for this consideration.
And again, guys, I'm not saying that we'll be successful in clawing all of it back. I don't want to say yes to this, move forward, and then when we get into budget season, I don't want you to feel like I've had a change of heart when I'm being hard to deal with on the budget and trying to actually reduce the M&O.
I just don't understand how that would be a deviation from how you are every budget cycle. So, I don't know where all the confirmation's coming from, but
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. So.
Well, and Mayor, I think it's fair to say that as a council, we have been more aggressive, especially when you look at what Rollingwood has done in the past of extending payments out as long as possible. And I tend to favor that in the economy that we've been in and in the growth that we're in. I think that hearing a couple of different things during the meeting, it changed my perspective.
Yeah, and that's, again, I meant it sincerely. Circumstances change, and you don't necessarily have to have your foot down on a pedal for the entire ride, right? James, tell you what, if you wouldn't mind figuring out kind of what that looks like, kind of, pushing up against, land us somewhere 375, 38 kind of thing. And that sound about right, Gavin?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay. So if we can get somewhere in there, and that allow council to get comfortable with the burden on the average household versus cost savings across the amortization period.
Okay. Just for my clarification, is it the council's intention to come back and review these scenarios again, or do you wish for us to proceed on a certain timeline with
How quickly do you think you can get those numbers together?
I can give you a pretty good estimate just right now. I would say that the question is, what exactly is council wanting to see? Because if we target essentially what we would be doing is if we were targeting a tax rate of 3.8 cents, we would basically size the first two principal payments to achieve that result. And so the variables would be interest saved, the additional interest over the life of the loan, and perhaps cost to the taxpayer on, I guess, on certain.
James, just so you know, the way it helped me get my head around it was we took your numbers and asked Abel to run a quick scenario for us on what's the bottom line dollar amount impact on an average household in the city of Rollingwood. The average household is 1.3. and he ran that scenario, right? And then it's easy enough for any of us to say, okay, well, somebody's got to figure out how to squeeze an extra $35 or $50 a month out of their budget, and that's, for some folks in Rollingwood, $35 or $50 doesn't make much difference. In other scenarios, that can be a real difference maker for folks, right? And even the difference between 35 and 50 can be a real difference maker for some folks. So that's, does that give you some context as to what we're wrestling with right now?
Yes, I'm sorry, it does. I do see that in the agenda packet later.
Yeah.
I can certainly get you that.
Are you expecting to reconvene a council meeting, or are you okay with Gavin reviewing the numbers and giving a thumbs up or thumbs down to James so we can proceed and stay on kind of the timeline we have identified tonight?
Well, I'm certainly comfortable with it because I suspect I'll probably see it at the same time Gavin does to give it a thumbs up or down. So I would suggest there that it be up to council, and what I was actually going to get to in lieu of convening a meeting to approve, if folks can generally agree that this is a good approach, then we can have those numbers come over from James, and then be provided to the council members through Ashley, so that everybody is informed ahead of proceeding.
Does it not take council action to proceed?
Well,
So we don't have to approve. We don't have to approve proceeding with the bond notes.
Well, council member, you do have to take action to approve the sale of the tax notes, and I'm stepping on Jerry's toes here, but I believe the item for this evening was just to get a consensus, and as I mentioned earlier, our plan would be to take bids from potential investors in an auction type sale, and on the date of I believe the 20th scheduled council meeting date, we would present the results to council for your approval, and Jerry Kyle can explain the particulars of the proceedings on that council meeting date.
Thanks, James. Yeah, this was just to get some direction from council. The action item will be on the 20th, assuming the schedule we've talked about, and that would be an ordinance authorizing the issuance of the tax notes that would have all the principal payment amounts and the interest rates and the purchase price in the name of the purchaser.
Yeah, correct. And to say it another way, any decisions or directions given tonight does not lock the city into, does not obligate you into anything other than it's just giving us direction to begin the process. Prepare.
I feel comfortable with Gavin and Amber and Mayor, y'all all looking at it, and if we can get an email just so that we have the information, that's great.
But and I'm happy to do that. I don't think anything would preclude the mayor from visiting with each of us individually either on how they're proceeding to draft the package, right? So I'm happy to look at that. You can start with me and then work your way around council, and there's no, I mean, that doesn't constitute a rolling quorum because we're not making a decision. You're just saying, here's what we're looking at.
I'm just providing a level of information, and
right.
Yeah, yes, that's right. Okay, so is everybody comfortable with that approach?
Yes.
Sarah?
I just want to make sure, we're talking about debt for the city. I want to make sure that we are not starting down a process with a decision that we did not post, because we're not posted for taking action today. I just want to make sure that this is not constituting a action
Correct.
that
So
somebody
action-
can come back and check to later.
Action will be taken on May 20th. And as bond counsel noted, we're not obligated either way right now. Now's a really good time after this meeting to have the discussion with the continued discussion, I guess, is for my part with members of the community so that folks understand what we're doing. And more important, why.
And the last point I would make, because the initial payments are not due until 2021, it will be after our next budgeting cycle. Am I correct in that, Amber?
Yes.
Right. And so when we're talking about what when we're talking about the cost to the residents, that is an accurate statement if you look at it at face value of the notes that we're talking about doing, but it is not an accurate statement until we get through our budget cycle, because I've given full notice to everyone that we're going to try to claw back some of that in the M&O rate. So yes, we do need to look at it, and that is how I'm looking at it the same way, Sarah, of the impact on the homeowner. But at the same time, we're not going to know exactly what that ultimate hit is on the homeowner until we get through our budgeting cycle, because my intent will be to try to mitigate as much of that INS increase as possible in the M&O rate, which is precisely what's making Amber nervous.
And and it will also this assumption is made on this exact same valuation. We don't know for sure what that will look like, and therefore don't know the impact to the homeowner.
But it will impact the taxes that are due in January of 2021.
Yes.
Yes.
So.
And I think I think we'll see some growth. I don't know about y'all, but my taxes still went up when I got my notice the other day. So.
Same.
Well, I think the reason for that, I noticed, is that if your appraisal was more than 10% last year, you got that cap, and then they've just moved up to it. So I know that they were saying that we would still see rising property appraisals, but I think that's a confusing issue.
Yeah. My value was the same, but my bill was not.
Right. Same. Yeah.
Okay, council. Specifically on the agenda item, do we have any further discussion for item 10? We'll be revisiting this conversation with specific regards on May 20th. If there's nothing else, Amber, do we have anybody waiting in the wings with comment?
No.
If there's nothing else, council, then I'm going to move to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
You guys are going to move to adjourn the meeting. I'm going to sit here.
And I moved to adjourn the meeting.
And I second.
Oh, yes.
There we go. Assuming there's no problem with that, I want to thank everybody for the time. I know this has been a little bit more grueling than I'm sure we all hoped for on a Thursday afternoon, but time well spent. Thank you all, council. And again, I noted it earlier. Spent a little time thinking about the Farrell family. It's been rough for them. I'm sure it's rough for all of us, challenging times, but this was a big one for them. So
has the service? Do we have information on the service?
No, I haven't received it yet.
Okay.
And I tell you what, as soon as I do, I'll make sure that folks are aware.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you.
You bet. All right, guys. Stay safe in the meantime. And again, thank you all for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.